Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Upbeat Endings, Volume 2. The Last Letter by Fritz Leiber. $1,000 a Plate by Jack McKenty. The Overlord's Thumb by Robert Silverberg. Boy Meets Dyevitza by Robert F. Young. Fairyland Planet by John Silletto. The Last Letter by Fritz Leiber, originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, June 1958. Narrated by Trussel. On 10th month 1, 2457 AD, at exactly 9 a.m. Planetary Federation time, but with a permissible error of a millionth of a second either way, in the 5th sublevel of New York Robot Postal Station 68, Black Sorter gulped down 10,000 pieces of first-class mail. This breakfast tidbit did not agree with the mail-sorting machine. It was as if a robust dog had been fed a large chunk of good red meat with a strychnine peel in it. Black Sorter's innards went whir-clunk. A blue electric glow enveloped him, and he began to shake as if he might break loose from the concrete. He desperately spat back over his shoulder a single envelope, gave a great huff, and blew out toward the sorting tubes a medium-sized snowstorm consisting of the other 9,999 pieces of first-class mail chewed to confetti. Then, still convulsed, he snapped up a fresh 10,000 and proceeded to chomp and grind on them. Black Sorter was rugged. The rejected envelope was tongued up by Red Subsorter, who growled deep in his throat, said a very bad word, and passed it to Yellow Rerouter, who passed it to Green Rerouter, who passed it to Brown Study, who passed it to Pink Wastebasket. Unlike Black Sorter, Pink Wastebasket was very delicate, though highly intuitive, the machine equivalent of a White Russian countess. She was designed to scan in 3,137 codes, route special delivery space mail to interplanetary liners by messenger rocket, and distinguish 9s from upside-down 6s. Pink Wastebasket haughtily inhaled the offending envelope, and almost instantly turned a bright crimson and began to tremble. After a few minutes, small atomic flames started to flicker from a midsection. White Nursemaid 7 and Greasy Joe both received Pink Wastebasket's distress signal, and got there as fast as their wheels could roll them, but the high-born machine's malady was beyond their simple skills of oil can and electroshock. They summoned other machine-tending and repairing machines, ones far more expert than themselves, but all were baffled. It was clear that Pink Wastebasket, who continued to tremble and flicker uncontrollably, was suffering from the equivalent of a major psychosis with severe psychosomatic symptoms. She spat a stream of filthy irons at Grey Psychiatrist, not recognizing her old friend. Meanwhile, the paper blizzard from Black Sorter was piling up in great drifts between the dark pillars of the sublevel, and flurries had reached Pink Wastebasket's aristocratic area. An expedition of sturdy machines headed by 2 hastily summoned snowplows was dispatched to immobilize Black Sorter at all costs. Pink Wastebasket, quivering like a demented hula dancer, was clearly approaching a crisis. Finally, Grey Psychiatrist, after consulting with Green Surgeon, and even then with an irritated reluctance, as if he were calling in a witch doctor, summoned a human being. The human being walked respectfully around Pink Wastebasket several times, and then gave her a nervous little poke with a rubber-handled probe. Pink Wastebasket gently regurgitated her last snack, turned dead white, gave a last flicker and shake, and expired. Black Coroner recorded the immediate cause of death as tinkering by a human being. The human being, a bald and scrawny one named Potshelter, picked up the envelope responsible for all the trouble, stared at it incredulously, opened it with trembling fingers, scanned the contents briefly, gave a great shriek, and ran off at top speed, forgetting to hop on his perambulator, which followed him, making anxious clucking noises. The nearest human representative of the Solar Bureau of Investigation, a rather wooden-looking man named Crumbine, also bald, recognized Potshelter as soon as the latter burst gasping into his office, squeezing through the door while it was still dilating. The human beings whose work took them among the top brass, as the upper echelon machines were sometimes referred to, formed a kind of human elite, just one big, nervous family. "Sit down, Potshelter," the SBI man said. "Hold still a second so the chair can grab you. Hitch onto the hookah and choose a tranquilizer from the tray at your elbow. Whatever deviation you've uncovered can't be that much of a danger to the planets. I imagine that when you leave this office, the solar battle fleet will still be orbiting peacefully around Luna." "I seriously doubt that." Potshelter gulped a large lavender pill and took a deep breath. "Crumbine, a letter turned up in the first-class mail this morning." "Great Scott! It is a letter from one person to another person. Good Lord!" "The flow of advertising has been seriously interfered with. At a modest estimate, 300 million pieces of expensive first-class advertising have already been chewed to rags, and I'm not sure the steel helms, God bless 'em, have the trouble in hand yet. Judas Priest!" "Naturally, the poor machines weren't able to cope with the letter. It was utterly outside their experience, beyond the furthest reach of their programming. It threw them into a terrible spasm. Pink Wastebasket is dead, and at this very instant, if we're lucky, 3 police machines of the toughest blued steel are holding down Black Sorter and putting a muzzle on him." "Great Scott! It's incredible, Potshelter. And Pink Wastebasket dead? Take another tranquilizer, Potshelter, and hand over the tray." Crumbine received it with trembling fingers, started to pick up a big pink pill, but drew back his hand from it in sudden revulsion at its colour, and swallowed 2 blue oval ones instead. The man was obviously fighting to control himself. He said unsteadily, "I almost never take doubles, but this news you bring, good Lord! I seem to recall a case where someone tried to send a sound tape through the mails, but that was before my time. Incidentally, is there any possibility that this is a letter sent by one group of persons to another group? A hive or a therapy group or a social club? That would be bad enough, of course, but—" "No, just one single person sending to another." Potshelter's expression set in grimly solicitous lines. "I can see you don't quite understand, Crumbine. This is not a sound tape, but a letter written in letters. You know, letters, characters, like books." "Don't mention books in this office!" Crumbine threw himself up angrily and then slumped back. "Excuse me, Potshelter, but I find this very difficult to face squarely. Do I understand you to say that one person has tried to use the mails to send a printed sheet of some sort to another?" "Worse than that, a written letter." "Written? I don't recognize the word." "It's a way of making characters, or forming visual equivalents of sound without using electricity. The writer, as he's called, employs a black liquid and a pointed stick called a pen. I know about this because one hobby of mine is ancient means of communication." Crumbine frowned and shook his head. "Communication is a dangerous business, Potshelter, especially at the personal level. With you and me it's all right, because we know what we're doing." He picked up a 3rd blue tranquilizer. But with most of the high folk, person-to-person communication is only a morbid form of advertising, a dangerous travesty of normal newscasting, catharsis without the analyst, recitation without the teacher, a perversion of promotion employed in betraying and subverting. The frown deepened as he put the blue pill in his mouth and chewed it. "But about this pen, Do you mean that fellow glues the pointed stick to his tongue and then speaks, and the black liquid traces the vibrations on the paper? A primitive non-electrical oscilloscope? Sloppy but conceivable, and producing a record of sorts of the spoken word. No, no, Crumbine. Potshelter nervously popped a square orange tablet in his mouth. It's a handwritten letter. Crumbine watched him. I never mix tranquilizers, he boasted absently. Handwritten, eh? You mean that the message was imprinted on a hand, and the skin or the entire hand afterward detached and sent through the mails in the fashion of a Martian reproach? A grisly find indeed, Potshelter. You still don't quite grasp it, Crumbine. The fingers of the hand move the stick that applies the ink, producing a crude imitation of the printed word. Diabolical! Crumbine smashed his fist down on the desk so that the 4 phones and 2 score microphones rattled. I tell you, Potshelter, the SBI is ready to cope with the subtlest modern deceptions, but when fiends search out and revive tricks from the pre-atomic cave era, it's almost too much. But, great Scott, I dally while the planets are in danger. What's the sender's code on this hellish letter? No code, Potshelter said darkly, proffering the envelope. The return address is handwritten. Crumbine blanched as his eyes slowly traced the uneven lines in the upper left-hand corner. From Richard Rowe, 215 West 10th Street, horizontal, 2837 Rocket Court, vertical. Hive 37, New York, 319, NY, Columbia, Terra. Ugh! Crumbine said, shivering. Those crawling characters, those letters that you call them, those things barely enough like print to be readable. They seem to be on the verge of awakening all sorts of horrid racial memories. I find myself thinking of fur-clad witch doctors dipping long-pointed sticks in bubbling black cauldrons. No wonder Pink Wastebasket couldn't take it, brave girl. Firming himself behind his desk, he pushed a number of buttons and spoke long numbers and meaningful alphabetical syllables into several microphones. Banks of coloured lights around the desk began to blink like a theatre marquee, sending Morse code, while phosphorescent arrows crawled purposefully across maps and space charts and through 3-dimensional street diagrams. There, he said at last. The sender of the letter's being apprehended and will be brought directly here. We'll see what sort of man this Richard Rowe is, if we can assume he's human. 7 precautionary cordons are being drawn around his population station, 3 composed of machines, 2 of SBI agents, and 2 consisting of human and mechanical medical combat teams. Same goes for the intended recipient of the letter. Meanwhile, a destroyer squadron of the Solar Fleet has been detached to orbit over New York. In case it becomes necessary to Z-bomb? Potshelter asked grimly. Crumbine nodded. With all those villains lurking just outside the solar system in their invisible black ships, with planeticide in their hearts, we can't be too careful. One word transmitted from one spy to another, and anything may happen. And we must bomb before they do, so that as to contain our losses. Better one city destroyed than a traitor on the loose who may destroy many cities. 100 years ago, 3 person-to-person postcards went through the mails. Just 3 postcard, Potshelter, and went Schenectady, Hoboken, Cicero, and Walla Walla. Here, as long as you're mixing them, try one of these oval blues. I find them best for steady swallowing. Bells jangled. Crumbine grabbed up 2 phones, holding one to each ear. Potshelter automatically picked up a third. The ringing continued. Crumbine started to wedge one of his phones under his chin, nodded sharply at Potshelter, and then toward a cluster of microphones at the end of the table. Potshelter picked up a 4th phone from behind them. The ringing stopped. The 2 men listened, looking doped, Crumbine with an eye fixed on the sweep second hand of the large wall clock. When it had made 1 revolution, he cradled his phones. Potshelter followed suit. I do like the simplicity of the new on the hour Puffyloaf phono commercial, the latter remarked thoughtfully. The bread that's lighter than air. Nice. Crumbine nodded. "I hear they've had to add mass to the lead foil wrapping to keep the loaves from floating off the shelves. Fact." He cleared his throat. "Too bad we can't listen to more phono commercials. But even when there isn't a crisis on the agenda, I find I have to budget my listening time. 1 minute per hour strikes a reasonable balance between duty and self-indulgence." The nearest wall began to sing. "Mr. J. Augustus Crumbine, we all think you're fine, 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 fine. Now out of the skyey blue come some telegrams for you." The wall opened to a small heart shape toward the centre, and a sheaf of pale yellow envelopes arced out and plopped on the middle of the desk. Crumbine started to leaf through them, scanning the little transparent windows. Electronic soap, better homes and landing platforms, psycho blinkers, your girl next door, poppy woppies, poopsie whoopsies. He started to open an envelope, then, after a quick look around and an apologetic smile at Potshelter, dumped them all on the disposal hopper, which gargled briefly. "After all, there is a crisis this morning," he said in a defensive voice. Potshelter nodded absently. "I can remember back before personalized delivery and rhyming robots," he observed. "But how I'd miss them now. So much more distingué than the hives with their non-personalized radio, TV and stereo advertising. For that matter, I believe there are some backward areas in Terra where the great advertising potential of telephones and telegrams hasn't been fully realized, and they are still used in part for personal communication. Now me, I've never in my life sent or received a message except on my walkie-talkie." He patted his breast pocket. Crumbine nodded, but he was a trifle shocked and inclined to revise his estimate of Potshelter's social status. Crumbine conducted his own social correspondence solely by telepathy. He shared with 3 other SBI officials a private telepath, a charming albino girl named Agnes. "Yes, and it's a very handsome walkie-talkie," he assured Potshelter a little falsely. "Suits you. I like the upswept antenna." He drummed on the desk and swallowed another blue tranquilizer. "Damn it, what's happened to those machines? They ought to have the 2 spies here by now. Did you notice that the second, the intended recipient of the letter, seems to be female? Another good Terran name too, Jane Doe. Hive in Upper Manhattan." He began to tap the envelope sharply against the desk. "Damn it, where are they?" "Excuse me," Potshelter said hesitantly, "but I'm wondering why you haven't read the message inside the envelope." Crumbine looked at him blankly. "Great Scott! I assumed that at least it was in some secret code, of course. Normally I'd have asked you to have Pink Wastebasket try her skill on it, but—" His eyes widened and his voice sank. "You don't mean to tell me that it's—" Potshelter nodded grimly. "Handwritten too, yes." Crumbine winced. "I keep trying to forget that aspect of the case." He dug out the message with shaking fingers, fumbled it open, and read. "Dear Jane, it must surprise you that I know your name, for our hives are widely separated. Do you recall day before yesterday, when your guided tour of Grand Central Spaceport got stalled because the guide blew a fuse? I was the young man with hair in the tour behind yours. You were a little frightened, and a group mistress was reassuring you. The machine spoke your name. Since then I have been unable to forget you. When I go to sleep, I dream of your face looking up sadly at the mistress's kindly photocells. I don't know how to get in touch with you, but my grandfather has told me stories his grandfather told him that his grandfather told him about young men writing what he calls love letters to young ladies. So I'm writing you a love letter. I work in a first-class advertising house, and I will slip this love letter into an outgoing 10,000 pack and hope. Do not be frightened of me, Jane. I am no caveman, except for my hair. I am not insane. I am emotionally disturbed, but in a way that no machine has ever described to me. I want only your happiness. Sincerely, Richard Rowe." Crumbine slumped back in his chair, which braced itself manfully against him, and looked long and thoughtfully at Potshelter. "Well, if that's a code, it's certainly a fiendishly subtle one. You'd think he was talking to his girl next door." Potshelter nodded wonderingly. "I only read as far as where they were planning to blow up Grand Central Spaceport and all the guides in it." "Judas Priest, I think I have it." Crumbine shot up. "It's a pilot advertisement. Boy next door, or that kind of thing, printed to look like handwrittening, which would make all the difference. And the pilot copy got mailed by accident, which would mean there is no real Richard Rowe." At that instant the door dilated, and 2 blue detective engines hustled a struggling young man into the office. He was a slim, rather handsome, had a bushy head of hair that had somehow survived evolution and radioactive fallout, and across the chest and back of his paper singlet was neatly stamped Richard Rowe. When he saw the 2 men, he stopped struggling and straightened up. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, "but these police machines must have made a mistake. I've committed no crime." Then his gaze fell on the hand-addressed envelope on Crumbine's desk, and he turned pale. Crumbine laughed harshly. "No crime? No, not at all. Merely using the mails to communicate. Ha!" The young man shrank back. "I'm sorry, sir." "Sorry," he says. "Do you realize that your insane prank has resulted in the destruction of perhaps 500 million pieces of first-class advertising, in the strangulation of a postal station and the paralysis of Lower Manhattan, in the mobilization of SBI reserves and the de-mothballing of 2 divisions of GI machines and the redeployment of the solar battle fleet? Good Lord, boy, why did you do it?" Richard Rowe continued to shrink, but he squared his shoulder. "I'm sorry, sir, but I just had to. I just had to get in touch with Jane Doe." "A girl from another hive? A girl you'd merely gazed at because a guide happened to blow a fuse?" Crumbine stood up, shaking an angry finger. "Great Scott, boy! Where was your girl next door?" Richard Rowe stared bravely at the finger, which made him look a trifle cross-eyed. "She died, sir. Both of them." "But there should be at least 6. "I know, sir, but of the other 4, 2 have been shipped to the Adirondacks on vacation, and 2 recently got married and haven't been replaced." Potshelter, a faraway look in his eyes, said softly, "I think I'm beginning to understand." But Crumbine thundered on at Richard Rowe with, "Good Lord, I can see you've had your troubles, boy. It isn't often we have these shortages of girls next door, so that temporarily a boy can't marry the girl next door as he always should. But, Judas Priest, why didn't you take your troubles to your psychiatrist, your group master, your socializer, your queen mother?" "My psychiatrist is being overhauled, sir, and his replacement short-circuits every time he hears the word trouble. My group master and socializer are on vacation duty in the Adirondacks. My queen mother is busy replacing girls next door." "Yes, it all fits," Potshelter proclaimed excitedly. "Don't you see, Crumbine? Except for a set of mischances that would only occur once in a billion times, the letter would never have been conceived or sent." "You may have something there," Crumbine concurred. "But in any case, boy, why did you, written this letter to this particular girl? What is there about Jane Doe that made you do it?" "Well, you see, sir, she's—" Just then the door redilated, and a blue matron machine conducted a young woman into the office. She was slim, and she had a head of hair that would have graced a museum beauty, while across the back chest is an inadequate word, of a paper chemise, Jane Doe was silk-screened in the palest pink. Crumbine did not repeat his last question. He had to admit to himself that it had been answered fully. Potshelter whistled respectfully. The blue detective engines gave hard-boiled grunts. Even the blue matron machine seemed awed by the girl's beauty. But she had eyes only for Richard Rowe. "My Grand Central man," she breathed in amazement. "The man I've dreamed of ever since. My man with hair." She noticed the way he was looking at her, and she breathed harder. "Oh, darling, what have you done?" "I tried to send you a letter." "A letter? For me? Oh, darling!" Crumbine cleared his throat. Potshelter, I'm going to wind this up fast. Miss Doe, could you transfer to this young man's hive?
Oh, yes, sir. Mine has an overplus of girls next door.
Good. Mr. Rowe, there's a sky pilot 2 levels up. Look for the usual white collar just below the photocells. Marry this girl and take her home to your hive. If your queen mother objects, refer her to, Potshelter here. He cut short the young people's thanks. Just one thing, he said, wagging a finger at Rowe. Don't written any more letters.
Why ever would I? Richard answered. Already my action is beginning to seem like a mad dream. Not to me, dear, Jane corrected him. Oh, sir, could I have the letter he sent me? Not to do anything with, not to show anyone, just to keep.
Well, I don't know, Crumbine began.
Oh, please, sir.
Well, I don't know why not, I was going to say. Here you are, miss. Just see that this husband of yours never writtens another. He turned back as the contracting door shut the young couple from view. You were right, Potshelter, he said briskly. It was one of those combinations of mischances that come up only once in a billion times. But we're going to have to issue recommendations for new procedures and safeguards that will reduce the possibilities of once in a trillion. We'll undoubtedly up the Terran income tax to a healthy percentage, but we can't have something like this happening again. Every boy must marry the girl next door, and the first-class males must not be interfered with. The advertising must go through.
I'd almost like to see it happen again, Potshelter murmured dreamily, if there were another Jane Doe in it.
Outside, Richard and Jane had halted to allow a small cortege of machines to pass. First came a squad of police machines with Black Sorter in their midst, unmuzzled and docile enough, though still gnashing his teeth softly. Then, stretched out horizontally and borne on the shoulders of grey psychiatrist, Black Coroner, White Nursemaid 7 and Greasy Joe. There passed the slim form of Pink Wastebasket, Snow White in death. The machines were keening softly, mournfully. Round about the black pillars, little mecho mops were scurrying like mice, cleaning up the last of the first-class male bits of confetti. Richard winced at his evidence of his aberration, but Jane squeezed his hand comfortingly, which produced in him a truly amazing sensation that changed his whole appearance.
I know how you feel, darling, she told him, but don't worry about it. Just think, dear, I'll always be able to tell your friends' wives something no other woman in the world can boast of, that my husband once wrote me a letter.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
$1,000 a Plate by Jack McKenty. Originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, October 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Sunset on Mars is a pale, washed-out, watery sort of procedure that is hardly worth looking at. The shadows of the cactus lengthen. The sun goes down without the slightest hint of colour or display, and everything is dark. About once a year there is one cloud that turns pink briefly. But even the travel books devote more space describing the new sign adorning the Canal Casino than they do on the sunset. The night sky is something else again. Each new crop of tourists goes to bed at sunrise the day after arrival with stiff necks from looking up all night. The craters of the moons are visible to the naked eye, and even a cheap pair of opera glasses can pick out the buildings of the Deimos space station. A typical comment from a sightseer is, "Just think, Fred, we were way up there only 12 hours ago." At fairly frequent intervals, the moons eclipse. The local Chamber of Commerce joins with the gambling casinos to use these occasions as excuses for a celebration. The Mardi Gras includes floats, costumes, liquor, women, gambling, and finishes off with a display of fireworks and a stiff note of protest from the nearby Mars Observatory. The day after a particularly noisy, glaring fireworks display, the top brass at the observatory called an emergency meeting. The topic was not a new one, but fresh evidence in the form of several still-wet photographic plates showing out-of-focus skyrocket trails, and a galaxy of first-magnitude aerial cracker explosions was presented. "I maintain they fire them in our direction on purpose," one scientist declared. This was considered to be correct because the other directions around town were oil refineries and the homes of the casino owners. "Why don't we just move the observatory way out in the desert?" a technician demanded. "It wouldn't be much of a job." "It would be a tremendous job," said Dr. Morton, the physicist. "If not for the glare of city lights on Earth, we wouldn't have had to move our telescopes to the moon. If not for the gravel falling out of the sky on the moon, making it necessary to resurface the reflectors every week, we wouldn't have had to move to Mars. Viewing conditions here are just about perfect, except for the immense cost of transporting the equipment, building materials, workmen, and paying us triple time for working so far from home. Why, did you ever figure the cost of a single photographic plate? What with salaries, freight to and from Earth, maintenance and all the rest, it's enormous." "Then why don't we cut down the cost of ruined exposures," asked the technician, "by moving the observatory away from town?" "Because," Dr. Morton explained, "we'd have to bring in crews to tear the place down, other crews to move it, still more crews to rebuild it, not to mention unavoidable breakage and replacement, which involved more freight from Earth. At $7.97 per pound deadweight, well, you figure it out." "So we can't move, and we can't afford ruined $1,000 plates," said the scientist who had considered himself a target for the fireworks. "Then what's the answer?" The usual suggestion was proposed that a delegation approach the town council to follow up the letter of protest. A search through the past meeting's minutes showed that this had never accomplished anything up to date. A recent arrival to the observatory mentioned that their combined brainpower should be enough to beat the games, and thus force the casino owners, who were the real offenders, out of business. One of the scientists, who had already tried that very scheme on a small scale, reported his results. He proved with his tabulations that in this instance science, in the guise of the law of averages, was unfortunately against them. Dr. Morton rose to his feet. The other men listened to his plan, at first with shocked horror, then with deep interest, and finally in wild exultation. The meeting broke up, with most of the members grinning from ear to ear. "It's lucky Dr. Morton is a physicist," said one of the directors. "No astronomer would ever have thought of that." A few days later, a modest little ad appeared in the weekly publication, What to Do in Marsport. It did not try to compete with any of the casino ads, all of which featured pretty girls, but it had a unique heading. "Free, for the first time ever, your horoscope, scientifically cast by the staff of the famous Mars Observatory. Learn your luck, your future. Write or call Mars Observatory. No charge, no obligation." Since the horoscopes being offered were about the only things on Mars that didn't cost the tourists any money, the response was great. The recipient of a horoscope found a mimeographed folder which contained 3 pages describing the present positions of the planets, where to look for Earth in the sky, and what science hoped to learn the next time Mercury was in transit. The 4th page held the kicker. It said that while the tourist's luck would be better than average at most of the gambling houses, he would lose consistently if he played at Harvey's club. Within 2 days, the only people playing at Harvey's were the shills, The following day, the visitors to the observatory included Harvey. The gambler was welcomed with mingled respect for his money and contempt for his occupation. He was taken immediately to see Dr. Morton, who greeted him with a sly smile. Harvey's conversation was brief and to the point. "How much?" he asked, waving a horoscope under Dr. Morton's nose. "Just a promise," said the scientist. Harvey said nothing, but looked sullen. "You are on the town council," Morton continued. "Now, the next time the question of tourist entertainment is discussed, we want you to vote against a fireworks display." He then explained how important plates had been ruined by skyrocket trails. Harvey listened with great interest, especially when Dr. Morton flatly stated that each casino, in turn, would get the same publicity in the horoscopes. "The council members are all for the tourists," Harvey commented. "And you guys are supposed to be nuts, like all scientists. But I'll do like you say." He reached into his pocket. "Here's $50. Use it for a full-page ad this time, and do the Desert Sands Casino in your next horoscope. And say, before I go, can I look through the telescope? I never seem to have had the time before." At weekly intervals, Dr. Morton did the Desert Sands, Franklin's Paradise, the Martian Gardens, and the Two Moons Club. From each owner he extracted the same promise to vote against the fireworks at the council meetings. The technique was settling down to a routine. Each victim came, made the promise, paid for the following week's ad, named the next casino, and was taken on a tour of the observatory. Then disaster struck. It took the form of an interplanetary telegram from Harvard Observatory, their parent organization. It read, "Earth newspapers carrying accounts of horoscopes published by your organization, very unscientific, must stop at once. Find other solution. L.K. Bell, Director." Dr. Morton was eating alone in the staff dining room when he noticed a familiar face beside him. "Harvey," he said, "guess you've come down to gloat over our misfortune." "No, Professor," said Harvey. "You've got my promise to help you boys, and I'll stick by you. It's a rotten shame, too. You just about made it. The rest of the club owners saw the writing on the wall and were going to cooperate with you when the telegram came. All of us got contacts in the telegraph office, so they heard about it as soon as it arrived and stayed away." Dr. Morton said, "Yes, I suppose they would. There's not much we can do now." "There are 13 members on the council," Harvey continued, "and you got 5 of us. If that telegram had only come 1 day later, no more fireworks. But I got an idea." Dr. Morton pushed aside his empty coffee cup and stood up. "Let's get out in the fresh air." The town council was adding insult to injury by staging one of the biggest fireworks displays ever. It consisted of practically all skyrockets. Dr. Morton expressed wonder at their supply. Harvey explained that they were made right on Mars. He went on to tell his idea. "I was real interested in everything when you took me round the first time I was here," the gambler said. "The same goes for the other boys who saw the place. Most of us meant to come out here and look around sometime, but you people work nights, and us mostly working nights too. We never got around to it. How about arranging an exclusive tour sometime just for the club operators and their help? Then when they see everything, you could offer to name a star after them or something. If I hadn't already promised, I'd be willing to promise, just to be able to point in the sky and say, 'That's Harvey's star.'" Dr. Morton smiled gently. "That's a wonderful idea," he said, "but I don't think it would work. Any stars worth looking at with a naked eye already have names. The only ones we could name after people are so far away that it would take an exposure of several hours just to see them on a photographic plate. You wouldn't be able to point yours out at all. Besides, Harvard Observatory wouldn't stand for this idea either. It would make as much sense to them as you naming a poker chip after me. He sighed. But in any case, we would like to have all the owners over sometime. It might improve relations somewhat. The two of them watched a rocket wobble all over the sky before exploding. "Let's go back inside," said the physicist. "Maybe we can arrange that tour for Sunday." Sunday afternoon, the visitors, presumably softened up by what one of the chemists thought were martinis, were seated in the lecture hall listening to Dr. Morton's concluding remarks. "One of the technicians is working on a gadget with a photocell that closes the shutter on the film when a rocket goes up," Dr. Morton was saying. "It should cut down the exposure time a great deal. Right now, every night may be significant. If the plates from any one night are spoiled, we may not be able to duplicate them for a Martian year. Mankind is preparing the first trip to another star, and the work of Mars Observatory is necessary to ensure the success of that trip. You gentlemen are rightly the leaders of Mars, and so it is up to you to decide whether or not that success will be possible." He sat down to a smattering of applause. The visitors, except Harvey, then left. "It didn't go over, Professor," said Harvey. "I know," said Dr. Morton. "That washes out the plan." He turned to the gambler. "You're the only person I can trust with this," he said. "How would you like to help me make some fireworks?" 1 week later, the two men had everything ready. That night, as quietly as possible, they moved to a position behind a fence near the skyrocket launching racks. Dr. Morton was carrying a compass, a flashlight, and a small clinometer. Harvey was struggling with 2 large skyrockets. He whispered, "What if we miss, or they go off too soon, or something?" "Nonsense, Harvey," said Dr. Morton. He busied himself with the flashlight and compass, and carefully aimed one of the rockets. "You forget I am a physicist." He then aimed the other rocket and checked elevation with the clinometer. "The fuels are standard, and I worked out the trajectories on the computer. Ready with your match? These are going to explode in the canal and get everybody in the canal casino all wet." He peeked over the fence to see how the regular display was doing. "Here comes their finale. Ready, set, light." Covered by the launching of the last of the official display, the 2 rockets arced up and away. One of them did explode in the canal, and most of the casino's patrons did get wet. But the other wobbled off to the right, landed on the roof of Harvey's bachelor home, and burned it to the ground. Dr. Morton sat numbly in front of his typewriter, staring at a letter. He couldn't seem to find the right words for what he wished to say. He tried to derive inspiration from a glossy photograph lying on the table beside him. It had what looked like another skyrocket trail on it. Before he could answer it, the door opened and Harvey walked in, accompanied by 2 men with muscles. "I haven't seen you since the accident, Professor," he said. "I've been trying to write you a letter," said Dr. Morton, "to tell you how sorry I am about what happened. And I also have to thank you for getting that law against fireworks through the council. I'm extremely sorry it took your house burning down to convince them." "I keep my promises," said Harvey. One of the men with muscles turned the radio on, loud. "We're trying to get up a collection among the staff to help pay for your losses," said Dr. Morton, "but the director suggested a more permanent kind of remembrance." He picked up the photograph. "This will be one of the brightest objects in the sky in a few months. It won't be back again for thousands of years, but it will be around for a good while. We've just discovered it, and it is our privilege to call it Harvey's Comet." "That's nice," said Harvey. The first of the two men went around pulling down blinds. The other went into the bathroom and started filling the tub. "Well," said the physicist, looking tired and old, "I guess there's nothing more I can say." "Oh, yes, there is, Professor," said Harvey, with a sudden grin on his face. He turned to his muscle men. "You two guys, cut out the comedy and bring it in now." The two men followed his instructions. "You see, Professor," the gambler continued, "I took a beating on the house, but the other club boys chipped in and made up all my losses. So I don't need your money at all. Besides, I have two things to thank you for. First, I heard about the comet from one of your men, and it's the nicest things anybody's ever done for me." One of his men came back with what looked like a round candy box. "Second, that fire was the best publicity stunt I could get. It made the papers back on Earth, and all the new tourists are packing into the Harvey Club. Even the other operators are playing my tables. That's why I want you to have this." He handed Dr. Morton the box. It read Harvey's Club in the centre, and Dr. Morton's poker chip around the edge. Across the bottom it said 5,000. "That's dollars in it, Professor," said Harvey. "Don't spend it all in one place."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
The Overlord's Thumb by Robert Silverberg. Originally published in Infinity, March 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The sun had gone down blood red, and Colonel John Duval slept poorly because of it. The atmosphere on Markin was not normally conducive to blood-red sunsets, though they did happen occasionally on evenings when the blue of sunlight was scattered particularly well. The marks connected red sunsets with approaching trouble. Colonel Duval, who headed the Terran cultural and military mission to Markin, was more cultural than military himself, and so was willing to accept the Markin belief that the sunset was a premonition of conflict. He was tall, well-made, and erect in bearing, with the sharp, bright eyes and crisp manner of the military man. He successfully tried to project an appearance of authoritative officerhood, and his men respected and feared the image he showed them. His degree was in anthropology. The military education was an afterthought, but a shrewd one. It had brought him command of the Markin outpost. The Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs insisted that all missions to relatively primitive alien worlds be staffed and headed by military men. And, Duval reasoned, so long as I keep up the outward show, who's to know that I'm not the tough soldier they think I am? Markin was a peaceful enough world. The natives were intelligent, fairly highly advanced culturally, if not technically, easily dealt with on a rational being-to-being basis. Which explains why Duval slept badly the night of the red sun. Despite his elegant posture and comportment, he regarded himself essentially as a bookish, unmilitary man. He had some doubts as to his own possible behavior in an unforeseen time of crisis. The false front of his officerhood might well crumble away under stress, and he knew it. He dozed off, finally, toward morning, having kicked the covers to the floor and twisted the sheets into crumpled confusion. It was a warmish night. Most of them were on Markin, but he felt chilled. He woke late, only a few minutes before officers' mess, and dressed hurriedly in order to get there on time. As commanding officer, of course, he had the privilege of sleeping as late as he pleased, but getting up with the others was part of the task Duval imposed on himself. He donned the light summer uniform, slapped Depolator hastily on his tanned face, hooked on his formal blaster and belt, and signalled to his orderly that he was awake and ready. The Terran enclave covered 10 acres, half an hour's drive from one of the largest Marken villages. An idling jeep waited outside Duval's small private dome, and he climbed in, nodding curtly at the orderly. "Morning, Harris." "Good morning, sir. Sleep well?" It was a ritual by now. "Very well," Duval responded automatically, as the jeep's turbos thrummed once and sent the little car humming across the compound to the mess hall. Clipped to the seat next to Duval was his daily morning program sheet, prepared for him by the staffman of the day while he slept. This morning's sheet was signed by Dudley, a major of formidable efficiency, space service through and through, a military wing career man, and nothing else. Duval scanned the assignments for the morning, neatly written out in Dudley's crabbed hand. Kelly, Dorfman, Mellers, Steber, on linguistic detail, as usual. Same assignment as yesterday, in town. Haskell on medic duty, blood samples, urinalysis. Matsuoka to maintenance staff, through Wednesday. Jolly on zoo detail. Leonards, Mayer, Rodriguez on assigned botanical field trip, 2 days, extra jeep assigned for specimen collection. Duval scanned the rest of the list, but, as expected, Dudley had done a perfect job of deploying the men where they would be most useful and most happy. Duval thought briefly about Leonards on the botanical field trip. A 2-day trip might take them through the dangerous rainforest to the south. Duval felt a faint flicker of worry. The boy was his nephew, his sister's son, a reasonably competent journeyman botanist with a gold bar still untarnished on his shoulder. This was the boy's first commission. He had been assigned to Duval's unit at random, as a new man. Duval had concealed his relationship to Leonards from the other men, knowing it might make things awkward for the boy, but he still felt a protective urge. Hell, the kid can take care of himself, Duval thought, and scribbled his initials at the bottom of the sheet and clipped it back in place. It would be posted while the men were cleaning their quarters, and the officers ate, and by 0900 everyone would be out on his day's assignment. There was so much to do, Duval thought, and so little time to do it. There were so many worlds. He quitted the jeep and entered the mess hall. Officers' mess was a small well-lit alcove to the left of the main hall. As Duval entered, he saw 7 men standing stiffly at attention, waiting for him. He knew they hadn't been standing that way all morning. They had snapped to attention only when their lookout, probably Second Lieutenant Leonards, the youngest, had warned them he was coming. Well, he thought, it doesn't matter much, as long as appearance is preserved, the form. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said crisply, and took his place at the head of the table. For a while, it looked as if it were going to turn out a pretty good day. The sun rose in a cloudless sky, and the thermometer tacked to the enclave flagstaff registered 93 degrees. When Marken got hot, it got hot. By noon, Duval knew by now, they could expect something like 110 in the shade, and then a slow, steady decline into the low 80s by midnight. The botanical crew departed on time, rumbling out of camp in its 2 jeeps, and Duval stood for a moment on the mess hall steps watching them go, watching the other men head for their assigned posts. Stubble-faced Sergeant Jolly saluted him as he trotted across the compound to the Sioux, where he would tend the little menagerie of Marken wildlife the expedition would bring back to Earth at termination. Wiry little Matsuoka passed by, dragging a carpenter's kit. The linguistic team climbed into its jeep and drove off toward town, where they would continue their studies in the Marken tongue. They were all busy. The expedition had been on Marken just 4 months. 8 months was left of their time. Unless an extension of stay came through, they'd pack up and return to Earth for 6 months of furlough come report session, and then it would be on to some other world for another year of residence. Duval was not looking forward to leaving Marken. It was a pleasant world, if a little on the hot side, and there was no way of knowing what the next world would be like. A frigid ball of frozen methane, perhaps, where they would spend their year bundled into Valdez breathing suits and trying to make contact with some species of intelligent ammonia-breathing mollusks. Better the devil we know, Duval felt. But he had to keep moving on. This was his 11th world, and there would be more to come. Earth had barely enough qualified survey teams to cover 10,000 worlds half adequately, and life abounded on 10 million. He would retain whichever members of the current team satisfied him by their performance, replace those who didn't fit in, and go off on his next job 8 months from now. He turned on the office fan and took down the logbook. Unfastening the binder, he slipped the first blank sheet into the autotype. For once he avoided his standard blunder. He cleared his throat before switching on the autotype, thereby sparing the machine its customary difficulties in finding a verbal equivalent for his The guide light glowed a soft red. Duval said, 4th April, 2705. Colonel John F. Duval recording. 119th day of our stay on Marken, World 7 of System 1106 Sub-A. Temperature, 93 at 0900. Wind gentle, southerly. He went on at considerable length, as he did each morning. Finishing off the required details, he gathered up the sheaf of specialty reports that had been left at his door the night before, and began to read abstracts into the log. The autotype clattered merrily, and a machine somewhere in the basement of the towering E.T. Affairs building in Rio de Janeiro was reproducing his words as the sub-radio hookup transmitted them. It was dull work. Duval often wondered whether he might have been ultimately happier doing simple anthropological fieldwork, as he had once done, instead of taking on the onerous burden of routine that an administrative post entailed. But someone has to shoulder the burden, he thought. Earthman's burden. We're the most advanced race. We help the others. But no one twists our arms to come out to these worlds and share what we have. Call it an inner compulsion. He intended to work until noon. In the afternoon, a Marken high priest was coming to the enclave to see him, and the interview would probably take almost till sundown. But about 1100 he was interrupted suddenly by the sound of jeeps unexpectedly entering the compound, and he heard the clamour of voices, both Terran voices and alien ones. A fearful argument seemed to be in progress, but the group was too far away, and Duval's knowledge of Marken too uncertain for him to be able to tell what was causing the rumpus. In some annoyance, he snapped off the autotype, rose from his chair, and peered through the window into the yard. 2 jeeps had drawn up, the botanical crew, gone less than 2 hours. 4 natives surrounded the 3 Earthmen. 2 of the natives clutched barbed spears. A 3rd was a woman, the 4th an old man. They were all protesting hotly over something. Duval scowled. From the pale, tense, unhappy faces of the men in the jeep, he could tell something was very wrong. That blood-red sunset had foretold accurately, he thought, as he dashed down the steps from his study. 7 pairs of eyes focused on him as he strode toward the group. 8 glittering alien eyes, warmly golden, and 6 shifting, uneasy Terran eyes. "What's going on out here?" Duval demanded. The aliens set up an immediate babble of noise, chattering away like a quartet of squirrels. Duval had never seen any of them behaving this way before. "Quiet!" he roared. In the silence that followed, he said very softly. "Lieutenant Leonards, can you tell me exactly what all this fuss is about?" The boy looked very frightened. His jaws were stiffly clenched, his lips bloodless. "Yes, sir," he said stammeringly. "Begging your pardon, sir, I seem to have killed an alien." In the relative privacy of his office, Duval faced them all again. Leonards, sitting very quietly staring at his gleaming boots. Maya and Rodriguez, who had accompanied him on the ill-starred botanizing journey. The aliens were outside. There would be time to calm them down later. "Okay," Duval said. "Leonards, I want you to repeat the story exactly as you just told it to me, and I'll get it down on the autotype. Start talking when I point to you." He switched on the autotype and said, "Testimony of Second Lieutenant Paul Leonards, botanist, delivered in presence of Commanding Officer on 4 April 2705. He jabbed a forefinger at Leonards. The boy's face looked waxy. Beads of sweat dotted his pale, vein-traced forehead, and his blonde hair was tangled and twisted. He clamped his lips together in an agonized grimace, scratched the back of one hand, and finally said, "Well, we left the Enclave about 0900 this morning, bound south and westerly on a tour of the outlying regions. Our purpose was to collect botanical specimens. I was in charge of the group, which also included Sergeants Maya and Rodriguez." He paused. We accomplished little in the first half hour. This immediate area had already been thoroughly covered by us anyway. But about 0945, Maya noticed a heavily wooded area not far to the left of the main road, and called it to my attention. I suggested we stop and investigate. It was impossible to penetrate the wooded area in our jeeps, so we proceeded on foot. I left Rodriguez to keep watch over our gear while we were gone. We made our way through a close-packed stand of deciduous angiosperm trees of a species we had already studied, and found ourselves in a secluded area of natural growth, including several species which we could see were previously uncatalogued. We found one in particular, a shrub consisting of a single thick succulent green stalk perhaps 4 feet high, topped by a huge golden-green composite flower head. We filmed it in detail, took scent samples, pollen prints, and removed several leaves. Duval broke in suddenly. "You didn't pick the flower itself?" Duval speaking. "Of course not. It was the only specimen in the vicinity, and it's not our practice to destroy single specimens for the sake of collecting. But I did remove several leaves from the stalk, and the moment I did that, a native sprang at me from behind a thick clump of ferns. He was armed with one of those notched spears. Maya saw him first and yelled, and I jumped back just as the alien came charging forward with his spear. I managed to deflect the spear with the outside of my arm and was not hurt. The alien fell back a few feet and shouted something at me in his language, which I don't understand too well as yet. Then he raised his spear and menaced me with it. I was carrying the standard-issue radial blaster. I drew it and ordered him in his own language to lower his spear, that we meant no harm. He ignored me and charged a second time. I fired in self-defense, trying to destroy the spear or at worst wound his arm, but he spun round to take the full force of the charge and died instantly." Leonards shrugged. "That's about it, sir. We came back here instantly." Duval speaking. "Sergeant Maya, would you say this account is substantially true?" Maya was a thin-faced, dark-haired man who was usually smiling, but he wasn't smiling now. "This is Sergeant Maya. I say that Lieutenant Leonards told the story substantially as it occurred, except that the alien didn't seem overly fierce despite his actions, in my opinion. I myself thought he was bluffing both times he charged, and I was a little surprised when Lieutenant Leonards shot him. That's all, sir." Frowning, the Colonel said, "Duval speaking. This has been testimony in the matter of the alien killed today by Lieutenant Leonards." He snapped off the autotype, stood up, and leaned forward across the desk, staring sternly at the trio of young botanists facing him. "These next few days are going to be my test," he thought tensely. Sergeant Rodriguez, since you weren't present at the actual incident, I'll consider you relieved of all responsibility in this matter, and your testimony won't be required. Report to Major Dudley for reassignment for the remainder of the week." "Thank you, sir," Rodriguez saluted, grinned gratefully, and was gone. "As for you two, though," Duval said heavily, "you'll both have to be confined to base pending the outcome of the affair. I don't need to tell you how serious this can be, whether the killing was in self-defense or not. Plenty of peoples don't understand the concept of self-defense." He moistened his suddenly dry lips. "I don't anticipate too many complications growing out of this, but these are alien people on an alien world, and their behavior is never certain." He glanced at Leonards. "Lieutenant, I'll have to ask for your own safety that you remain in your quarters until further notice." "Yes, sir. Is this to be considered arrest?" "Not yet," Duval said. "Maya, attach yourself to the maintenance platoon for the remainder of the day. We'll probably need your testimony again before this business is finished. Dismissed, both of you." When they were gone, Duval sank back limply in his web-phone chair and stared at his fingertips. His hands were quivering as if they had a life of their own. "John F. Duval, Ph.D. Anthropology, Columbia 82. Commissioned Space Service Military Wing 87, and now you're in trouble for the first time." "How are you going to handle it, Jack?" he asked himself. "Can you prove that that silver eagle really belongs on your shoulder?" He was sweating. He felt very tired. He shut his eyes for a moment, opened them, and said into the intercom, "Send in the marks." 5 of them entered, made ceremonial bows, and ranged themselves nervously along the far wall as if they were firing squad candidates. Accompanying them came Steber of the linguistics team, hastily recalled from town to serve as an interpreter for Duval. The colonel's knowledge of Markin was adequate, but sketchy. He wanted Steber around in case any fine points had to be dealt with in detail. The marks were humanoid in structure, simian in ancestry, which should have made them close kin to the Terrans in general physiological structure. They weren't. Their skin was a rough, coarse, pebble-grained affair, dark-toned, running to muddy browns and occasional deep purples. Their jaws had somehow acquired a reptilian hinge in the course of evolution, which left them practically chinless, but capable of swallowing food in huge lumps that would strangle an earthman. Their eyes, liquid gold in colour, were set wide on their heads, allowing enormous peripheral vision. Their noses were flat buttons, in some cases barely perceptible. Duval saw 2 younger men, obviously warriors. They had left their weapons outside, but their jaws jutted belligerently, and the darker of the pair had virtually dislocated his jaw in rage. The woman looked like all the Mark woman, shapeless and weary behind her shabby cloak of furs. The remaining pair were priests, one old, one very old. It was this ancient to whom Duval addressed his first remarks. "I'm sorry that our meeting this afternoon has to be one of sorrow. I had been looking forward to a pleasant talk, but it's not always possible to predict what lies ahead." "Death lay ahead for him who was killed," the old priest said in the dry, high-pitched tone of voice that Duval knew implied anger and scorn. The woman let out a sudden wild ululation, 6 wailing words jammed together so rapidly Duval could not translate them. "What did she say?" he asked Steber. The interpreter flattened his palms together thoughtfully. "She's the woman of the man who was killed. She was demanding revenge," he said in English. Apparently, the 2 young warriors were friends of the dead man. Duval's eyes scanned the 5 hostile alien faces. "This is a highly regrettable incident," he said in Markin, but I trust it won't affect the warm relationship between Earthman and Markin that has prevailed so far. This misunderstanding—" "Blood must be atoned," said the smaller and less impressively garbed of the two priests. He was probably the local priest, Duval thought, and was probably happy to have his superior on hand to back him up. The colonel flicked sweat from his forehead. The young man who committed the act will certainly be disciplined. Of course you realize that a killing in self-defense cannot be regarded as murder, but I admit the young man did act unwisely and will suffer the consequences. It didn't sound too satisfying to Duval, and indeed the aliens hardly seemed impressed. The high priest uttered two short, sharp syllables. They were not words in Duval's vocabulary, and he looked over at Steber in appeal. "He said Leonard's was trespassing on sacred ground. He said the crime they're angry about is not murder, but blasphemy." Despite the heat, Duval felt a sudden chill. Not murder? This is going to be complicated, he realized gloomily. To the priest he said, "Does this change the essential nature of the case? He'll still be punished by us for his action, which can't be condoned." "You may punish him for murder, if you so choose," the high priest said, speaking very slowly so Duval could understand each word. The widow emitted some highly terrestrial-sounding sobs. The young man glowered stolidly. "Murder is not our concern," the high priest went on. "He has taken life. Life belongs to them, and they withdraw it whenever they see fit, by whatever means they care to employ. But he has also desecrated a sacred flower on sacred ground. These are serious crimes to us. Added to this, he has shed the blood of a guardian on sacred ground. We ask you to turn him over to us for trial by a priestly court on this double charge of blasphemy. Afterward, perhaps, you may try him by your own laws, for whichever one of them he has broken." For an instant all Duval saw was the old priest's implacable leathery face. Then he turned and caught the expression of white-faced astonishment and dismay Steber displayed. It took several seconds for the high priest's words to sink in, and several more before Duval came to stunned realization of the implications. They want to try an Earthman, he thought numbly, by their own law, in their own court, and mete out their own punishment. This had abruptly ceased being a mere local incident, an affair to clean up, note in the log, and forget. It was no longer a matter of simple reparations for the accidental killing of an alien. Now, thought Duval dully, it was a matter of galactic importance, and he was the man who had to make all the decisions. He visited Leonard's that evening, after the meal. By that time everyone in the camp knew what had happened, though Duval had ordered Steber to keep quiet about the alien demand to try Leonard's themselves. The boy looked up as Duval entered his room, and managed a soggy salute. "At ease, Lieutenant." Duval sat on the edge of Leonard's bed and squinted up at him. "Son, you're in very hot water now." "Sir, I know. You didn't mean to pluck leaves off the sacred bramble bush, and you couldn't help shooting down the native who attacked you. And if this business were as simple as all that, I'd reprimand you for hot-headedness and let it go at that. But what, sir?" Duval scowled and forced himself to face the boy squarely. "But the aliens want to try you themselves. They aren't so much concerned with the murder as they are with your double act of blasphemy. That withered old high priest wants to take you before an ecclesiastical court." "You won't allow that, of course, will you, Colonel?" Leonard seemed confident that such an unthinkable thing could never happen. "I'm not so sure, Paul," Duval said quietly, deliberately using the boy's first name. "What, sir?" "This is evidently something very serious you've committed. That high priest is calling a priestly convocation to deal with you. They'll be back here to get you tomorrow at noon," he said. "But you wouldn't turn me over to them, sir. After all, I was on duty. I had no knowledge of the offence I was committing. Why, it's none of their business." "Make them see that," Duval said flatly. "They're aliens. They don't understand Terran legal codes. They don't want to hear about our laws. By theirs, you've blasphemed, and blasphemers must be punished. This is a law-abiding race on Markin. They're an ethically advanced society, regardless of the fact that they're not technologically advanced. Ethically, they're on the same plane we are." Leonard's looked terribly pale. "You'll turn me over to them?" Duval shrugged. "I didn't say that, but look at it from my position. I'm leader of a cultural and military mission. Our purpose is to live among these people, learn their ways, guide them as much as we can in our limited time here. We at least try to make a pretense of respecting their rights as individuals and as a species, you know. Well, now it's squarely on the line. Are we friends living among them and helping them, or are we overlords grinding them under our thumbs?" "Sir, I'd say that was an oversimplification," Leonard remarked hesitantly. "Maybe so, but the issue's clear enough. If we turn them down, it means we're setting up a gulf of superiority between Earth and these aliens, despite the big show we made about being brothers. And word will spread to other planets. We try to sound like friends, but our actions in the celebrated Leonard's case reveal our true colours. We're arrogant, imperialistic, patronizing, and, well, do you see?" "So you're going to turn me over to them for trial, then?" the boy said quietly. Duval shook his head. He felt old, very old, at 50. "I don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet. If I turn you over, it'll certainly set a dangerous precedent, and if I don't, I'm not sure what will happen." He shrugged. "I'm going to refer the case back to Earth. It isn't my decision to make." But it was his decision to make, he thought, as he left the boys' quarters and headed stiff-legged toward the communications shack. He was on the spot, and only he could judge the complex of factors that controlled the case. Earth would almost certainly pass the buck back to him. He was grateful for one thing, though. At least Leonard's hadn't made an appeal to him on family grounds. That was cause for pride, and some relief. The fact that the boy was his nephew was something he'd have to blot rigorously from his mind until all this was over. The signalman was busy in the back of the shack, bent over a crowded work table. Duval waited a moment, cleared his throat gently, and said, "Mr. Rory?" Rory turned. "Yes, Colonel?" "Put through a sub-radio Solido to Earth for me, immediately. To Director Thornton at the ET department. And yell for me when you've made contact." It took 20 minutes for the subspace impulse to leap out across the light years and find a receiver on Earth. 10 minutes more for it to pass through the relay point and on to Rio. Duval returned to the shack to find the lambent green Solido field in tune and waiting for him. He stepped through and discovered himself standing a few feet before the desk of the ET department's head. Thornton's image was sharp, but the desk seemed to waver at the edges. Solid, non-organic objects always came through poorly. Quickly, Duval reviewed the situation. Thornton sat patiently, unmoving, till the end of it. Hands knotted rigidly, lean face set. He might have been a statue. Finally, he commented, "Unpleasant business." "Quite." "The alien is returning tomorrow, you say? I'm afraid that doesn't give us much time to hold a staff meeting and explore the problem, Colonel Duval." "I could probably delay him a few days." Thornton's thin lips formed a tight, bloodless line. After an instant he said, "No. Take whatever action you deem necessary, Colonel. If the psychological pattern of the race is such that unfortunate consequences would result if you refuse to allow them to try your man, then you must certainly turn him over. If the step can be avoided, of course, avoid it. The man must be punished in any case." The director smiled bleakly. "You're one of our best men, Colonel. I'm confident you'll arrive at an ultimately satisfactory resolution to this incident." "Thank you, sir," Duval said in a dry, uncertain voice. He nodded and stepped back out of the field range. Thornton's image seemed to flicker. Duval caught one last dismissing sentence. "Report back to me when the matter is settled." And then the field died. He stood alone in the shabby communications shack, blinking out the sudden darkness that rolled in over him after the solidophone's intense light, and after a moment began to pick his way over to the heaps of equipment and out into the compound. It was as he had expected. Thornton was a good man, but he was a civilian appointee, subject to government control. He disliked making top-level decisions, particularly when a colonel a few hundred light-years away could be pitchforked into making them for him. "Well," he thought, "at least I notified Earth. The rest of the affair is in my hands." Significantly, there was a red sunset again that night. He called a meeting of his top staff men for 09:15 the following morning. Work at the base had all but suspended. The linguistics team was confined to the area, and Duval had ordered guards posted at all exits. Violence could rise unexpectedly among even the most placid of alien peoples. It was impossible to predict the moment when a racial circuit breaker would cease to function and fierce hatred burst forth. They listened in silence to the tapes of Leonard's statements, Meyer's comments, and the brief interview Duval had had with the 5 aliens. Duval punched the cut-off stud and glanced rapidly round the table at his men. 2 majors, a captain, and a quartet of lieutenants comprised his high staff, and one of the lieutenants was confined to quarters. "That's the picture. The old high priest is showing up here about noon for my answer. I thought I'd toss the thing open for staff discussion first." Major Dudley asked for the floor. He was a short, stocky man with dark, flashing eyes, and on several occasions in the past had been known to disagree violently with Duval on matters of procedure. Duval had picked him for 4 successive trips, despite this. The colonel believed in diversity of opinion, and Dudley was a tremendously efficient organizer as well. "Major?" "Sir, it doesn't seem to me that there's any question of what action to take. It's impossible to hand Leonards over to them for trial. It's unearthlike." Duval frowned. "Would you elaborate, Major?" "Simple enough. We're the race who developed the space drive. Therefore, we're the galaxy's most advanced race. I think that goes without saying." "It does not," Duval commented, "but go ahead." Scowling, Dudley said, "Regardless of your opinion, sir, the aliens we've encountered so far have all regarded us as obvious superiors. I don't think that can be denied, and I think it can only be attributed to the fact that we are their superiors. Well, if we give up Leonards for trial, it cheapens our position. It makes us look weak, spineless. You're suggesting, then," Duval broke in, "that we hold the position of overlords in the galaxy, and by yielding to our serfs, we may lose all control over them. Is this your belief, Major?" Duval glared at him. Dudley met the colonel's angry gaze calmly. "Basically, yes, damn it, sir. I've tried to make you see this ever since the Hegath expedition. We're not out here in the stars to collect butterflies and squirrels. We—" "Out of order," Duval snapped coldly. "This is a cultural mission as well as military, Major, and so long as I'm in command, it remains primarily cultural." He felt on the verge of losing his temper. He glanced away from Dudley and said, "Major Grey, could I hear from you?" Grey was the ship's astrogator. On land, his functions were to supervise stockade construction and map-mating. He was a wiry, unsmiling little man with razor-like cheekbones and ruddy skin. "I feel we have to be cautious, sir. Handing Leonards over would result in a tremendous loss of Terran prestige." "Loss?" Dudley burst in. "It would cripple us! We'd never be able to hold our heads up honestly in the galaxy again if—" Calmly, Duval said, "Major Dudley, you've been ruled out of order. Leave this meeting, Major. I'll discuss a downward revision of your status with you later." Turning back to Grey without a further glance at Dudley, he said, "You don't believe, Major, that such an action would have a corresponding favourable effect on our prestige in the eyes of these worlds inclined to regard Earth uneasily?" "That's an extremely difficult thing to determine, sir." "Very well, then." Duval rose. "Pursuant to regulations, I brought this matter to the attention of authorities on Earth, and have also offered it for open discussion among my officers. Thanks for your time, gentlemen." Captain Marichal said uncertainly, "Sir, won't there be any vote on our intended course of action?" Duval grinned coldly. "As commanding officer of this base, I'll take the sole responsibility upon myself for the decision in this particular matter. It may make things easier for all of us in the consequent event of a court-martial inquiry." It was the only way, he thought, as he waited tensely in his office for the High Priest to arrive. The officers seemed firmly set against any conciliatory action in the name of Terra's prestige. It was hardly fair for him to make them take responsibility for a decision that might be repugnant to them. Too bad about Dudley, Duval mused, but insubordination of that sort was insufferable. Dudley would have to be dropped from the unit on the next trip out. "If there is any next trip out for me," he added. The intercom glowed gently. "Yes?" "Alien delegation is here, sir," said the orderly. "Don't send them in until I signal." He strode to the window and looked out. The compound at first glance seemed full of aliens. Actually, there were only a dozen, he realized, but they were clad in full panoply, bright red and harsh green robes, carrying spears and ornamental swords. Half a dozen enlisted men were watching them nervously from a distance, their hands ready to fly to blasters instantly if necessary. He weighed the choices one last time. If he handed Leonards over, the temporary anger of the aliens would be appeased, but perhaps at a long-range cost to Earth's prestige. Duval had long regarded himself as an essentially weak man with a superb instinct for camouflage. But would his yielding to the aliens imply to the universe that all Earth was weak? On the other hand, he thought, suppose he refused to release Leonards to the aliens? Then he would be, in essence, bringing down the Overlord's thumb, letting the universe know that Earthmen were responsible only to themselves and not to the peoples, the worlds they visit. Either way, he realized, the standing of Earth in the galaxy's estimation would suffer. One way, they would look like appeasing weaklings. The other, like tyrants. He remembered a definition he had once read. Melodrama is the conflict of right and wrong. Tragedy is the conflict of right and right. Both sides were right here. Whichever way he turned, there would be difficulties. And there was an additional factor. The boy. What if they executed him? Family considerations seemed absurdly picayune at this moment, but still, To hand his own nephew over for possible execution by an alien people? He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, sharpened the hard gaze of his eyes. A glance at the mirror over the bookcase told him he looked every inch the commanding officer. Not a hint of the inner conflict showed through. He depressed the intercom stud. "Send in the high priest. Let the rest of them wait outside." The priest looked impossibly tiny and wrinkled, a gnome of a man whose skin was fantastically gullied and mazed by extreme age. He wore a green turban over his hairless head, a mark of deep mourning, Duval knew. The little alien bowed low, extending his pipe-stem arms behind his back at a sharp angle, indicating respect. When he straightened, his head craned back sharply, his small round eyes peering directly into Duval's. "The jury has been selected. The trial is ready to begin. Where is the boy?" Duval wished fleetingly he could have had the services of an interpreter for this last interview, but that was impossible. This was something he had to face alone, without help. "The accused man is in his quarters," Duval said slowly. "First, I want to ask some questions, old one." "Ask." "If I give you the boy to try, will there be any chance of his receiving the death penalty?" "It is conceivable." Duval scowled. "Can't you be a little more definite than that?" "How can we know the verdict before the trial takes place?" "Let that pass," Duval said, seeing he would get no concrete reply. "Where would you try him?" "Not far from here." "Could I be present at the trial?" "No." Duval had learned enough of Markan grammar by now to realize that the form of the negative the priest had employed meant literally, "I say no and mean what I say." Moistening his lips, he said, "Suppose I should refuse to turn Lieutenant Leonards over to you for trial. How could I expect you people to react?" There was a long silence. Finally the old priest said, "Would you do such a thing?" "I'm speaking hypothetically. Literally, the form was, I speak on a cloud." "It would be very bad. We would be unable to purify the sacred garden for many months. Also," he added a sentence of unfamiliar words. Duval puzzled unsuccessfully over their meaning for nearly a minute. "What does that mean?" he asked at length. "Phrase it in different words." "It is the name of a ritual. I would have to stand trial in the Earthman's place, and I would die," the priest said simply. "Then my successor would ask you all to go away." The office seemed very quiet. The only sounds Duval heard were the harsh breathing of the old priest and the off-key chirruping of the cricket-like insects that infested the grass plot outside the window. Appeasement, he wondered, or the Overlord's thumb. Suddenly there seemed no doubt at all in his mind of what he should do, and he wondered how he could have hesitated. "I hear and respect your wishes, old man," he said, in a ritual formula of renunciation Steber had taught him. "The boy is yours. But can I ask a favor?" "Ask." "He didn't know he was offending your laws. He meant well. He's sincerely sorry for what he did. He's in your hands now, but I want to ask mercy on his behalf. He had no way of knowing he was offending." "This will be seen at the trial," the old priest said coldly. "If there is to be mercy, mercy will be shown him. I make no promises." "Very well," Duval said. He reached for a pad and scrawled an order demanding Lieutenant Paul Leonards to the aliens for trial, and signed it with his full name and title. "Here, give this to the Earthman who let you in. He'll see to it that the boy is turned over to you." "You are wise," the priest said. He bowed elaborately and made for the door. "Just one moment," Duval said desperately as the alien opened the door. "Another question." "Ask," the priest said. "You told me you'd take his place if I refused to let you have him. Well, how about another substitute? Suppose—" "You are not acceptable to us," the priest said, as if reading Duval's mind, and left. 5 minutes later, the colonel glanced out his window and saw the solemn procession of aliens passing through the exit posts and out of the compound. In their midst, unprotesting, was Leonards. He didn't look back, and Duval was glad of it. The colonel stared at the row of books a long time. The frayed spools that had followed him around from world to world, from grey Danelon to stormy Lurin to bone-dry Corval, and on to Hegath and Mqualt and the others, and now to warm blue-skied Markin. Shaking his head, he turned away and dropped heavily into the foam cradle behind his desk. He snapped on the autotype with a savage gesture and dictated a full account of his actions, from the very start until his climactic decision, and smiled bitterly. There would be a certain time lag, but before long the autotype facsimile machine in the ET department's basement would start clacking there in Rio, and Thornton would know what Duval had done. And Thornton would be stuck with it as department policy henceforth. Duval switched on the intercom and said, "I'm not to be disturbed under any circumstances. If there's anything urgent, have it sent to Major Gray. He's acting head of the base until I countermand. And if any messages come from Earth, let Gray have them too." He wondered if they'd relieve him of his command immediately, or wait until he got back to Earth. The latter more likely. Thornton had some subtlety, if not much. But there was certain to be an inquiry, and a head would roll. Duval shrugged and stretched back. "I did what was right," he told himself firmly. "That's the one thing I can be sure of. But I hope I don't ever have to face my sister again." He dozed after a while, eyes half open and slipping rapidly closed. Sleep came to him, and he welcomed it, for he was terribly tired. He was awakened suddenly by a loud outcry, a jubilant shout from a dozen throats at once, splitting the afternoon calm. Duval felt a moment's disorientation, then, awakening rapidly, he sprang to the window and peered out. A figure, alone and on foot, was coming through the open gateway. He wore regulation uniform, but it was dripping wet and torn in several places. His blonde hair was plastered to his scalp as if he had been swimming. He looked fatigued. Leonards. The colonel was nearly halfway out the front door before he realized that his uniform was in improper order. He forced himself back, tidied his clothing, and with steely dignity strode out the door a second time. Leonards stood surrounded by a smiling knot of men, enlisted men and officers alike. The boy was grinning wearily. "Attention!" Duval barked, and immediately the area fell silent. He stepped forward. Leonards raised one arm in an exhausted salute. There were some ugly bruises on him. "I'm back, Colonel." "I'm aware of that. You understand I'll have to return you to the marks for trial anyway, despite your no doubt daring escape?" The boy smiled and shook his head. "No, sir, you don't follow, sir. The trial's over. I've been tried and acquitted." "What's that?" "It was trial by ordeal, Colonel. They prayed for half an hour or so, and then they dumped me in the lake down the road. The dead man's 2 brothers came after me and tried to drown me, but I outswam them and came up safely on the other side." He shook his hair like a drenched cat, scattering a spray of water several feet in the air. "They nearly had me once, but as soon as I got across the lake alive and undrowned, it proved to them that I couldn't have meant any harm. So they declared me innocent, apologized, and turned me loose. They were still praying when I left them." There seemed to be no bitterness in Leonard's attitude. Apparently, Duval thought, he had understood the reason for the decision to hand him over, and would not hold it against him now. That was gratifying. "You'd better get to your quarters and dry off, Lieutenant, and then come to my office. I'd like to talk to you there." "Yes, sir." Duval spun sharply and headed back across the clearing to his office. He slammed the door behind him and switched on the autotype. The report to Earth would have to be amended now. A moment or two after he had finished, the intercom glowed. He turned it on and heard Steber's voice saying, "Sir, the old priest is here. He wants to apologize to you for everything. He's wearing clothing of celebration, and he brought a peace offering for us." "Tell him I'll be right out," Duval said, "and call all the men together, including Dudley, especially Dudley. I want him to see this." He slipped off his sweat-stained jacket and took a new one out. Surveying himself in the mirror, he nodded approvingly. "Well, well," he thought, "so the boy came through it safely. That's good." But he knew that the fate of Paul Leonard's had been irrelevant all along, except on the sheerly personal level. It was the larger issue that counted. For the first time, Earth had made a concrete demonstration of the equality of intelligent life doctrine it had been preaching so long. He had shown that he respected the Markan laws in terms of what they were to the marks, and he had won the affection of a race as a result. Having the boy return unharmed was a bonus. But the precedent had been set, and the next time, perhaps, on some other world, the outcome might not be so pleasant. Some cultures had pretty nasty ways of putting criminals to death. He realized that the burden the Earth exploration teams carried now had become many times heavier, that now Earthmen would be subject to the laws of the planets who hosted them, and no more unwitting botanical excursions into sacred gardens could be tolerated. But it was for the ultimate good, he thought. We've shown them that we're not overlords, and that most of us don't want to be overlords. And now the thumb comes down on us. He opened the door and stepped out. The men had gathered, and the old priest knelt abjectly at the foot of the steps, bearing some sort of enamelled box as his offering. Duval smiled and returned the bow, and lifted the old alien gently to his feet. "We'll have to be on our best behaviour from now on," he thought. "We'll really have to watch our steps, but it'll be worth it."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
Boy Meets Dyevitza by Robert F. Young. Originally published in Amazing Stories, October 1962. Narrated by Tom Trussel. A thrilling news bulletin dated September 11, 1996, was recently handed to me by an assistant who is too young to remember the star over Moscow, and it is toward him and others like him that the following history is directed. If it resembles fiction more than it does fact, the similarity is wholly intentional, for it is only through fiction that the past can be brought back to life. When Gordon Andrews first saw the girl, he took it for granted that she was a Venusian, a natural enough assumption in view of the fact that he was on Venus. She was kneeling beside a small brook, humming a little tune and washing out a pair of stockings, and so intent was she on her tune and her task that she did not hear him when he stepped out of the forest behind her. Her bobbed hair was the colour of horse chestnuts, and her clothing consisted of grey culottes, a grey blouse, black leather boots, and a small grey kepi. The tune she was humming was a passage from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Thus far, Gordon had taken Venus pretty much in his stride. The data supplied by the Venus probes during the early 60s, while obscure with regard to her cloud cover, had conclusively disproved former theories to the effect that she lacked a breathable atmosphere and possessed a surface temperature of more than 100 degrees centigrade, and had prepared him for what he had found: an atmosphere richer in oxygen content than Earth's, a comfortable climate, and a planet-wide sea, unbroken as yet save for an equatorial landmass no larger than a modest island. The data, by its very nature, had also prepared him for the possibility of human life. It had not prepared him, however, for a Venusian maiden on humming terms with Swan Lake. Small wonder, then, that he gasped. The girl dropped her stockings and shot to her feet so fast that she could have toppled into the brook if he hadn't leaped forward and caught her arm. She had a heart-shaped face, and her eyes were the hue of harebells. At the moment they were filled with alarm. Presently, however, the alarm went away, and recognition took its place. "Oh, it's you," she said, freeing her arm. He took an involuntary step backward. "Me?" he said. "Yes, Captain Gordon Andrews of the United States Space Force, is it not? You look quite a lot like your photograph." He could only stare at her. "I do?" "Yes, I saw it in one of your materialistic capitalistic magazines." She stood up a little straighter, an act that brought her harebell blue eyes on a level with the topmost button of his fatigues. "I am Major Sonia Mikhailovna, of the Soviet Space Force, and my ship is in the next valley. I arrived here yesterday." He got the picture then, and he felt sick. He should have known from her too correct, slightly stilted English, from the military cut of her clothing. He should have known in the first place, for that matter. It was the same old humiliating story. The manned Venus shot had been publicized for months before the actual launching, and he had been written up in every newspaper and magazine in the country. Articles had paid homage to his suburban upbringing, saluted his record at the Shepard Space Academy, praised his career as an orbital pilot, romanticized his bachelorhood, described how he liked his eggs, and inferred what a good catch he would be. Meanwhile, the Russians had gone quietly and systematically about their business, and at the precise psychological moment had pulled their usual unexpected coup. First it had been Laika, then Zvezdoshka, then Gagarin, then Dymov, the first man in the moon. Now it was Major Sonia Mikhailovna. But why a woman? And why one so seemingly delicate that you marvelled at her ability to withstand the acceleration of takeoff? Suddenly he got the whole picture, and he really felt sick. He could see the humiliating headlines, or rather, their English counterparts, in Pravda. "Soviet space girl beats capitalist cosmonaut to Venus. USSR triumph again." "I suppose you picked up my ship on your radar while I was coming in, and fixed the time and location of my landing," he said bitterly. Sonia Mikhailovna nodded. "My own arrival time has already been officially recorded, but the announcement of my success had to be withheld until I could establish your arrival time, and the exact time difference could be computed. Soon now, the news of our glorious new victory will be released to the world." She bent down, retrieved her stockings from the brook, and wrung them out. Straightening, she hung them on a low-hanging branch of a nearby tree. They were cotton, he noticed, and there was a hole in one of the toes. Suddenly she gave a start. Following the direction of her gaze, he gave one too. So did the man and the woman who had just emerged from the forest. Since his arrival 4 hours ago, Gordon had been wondering, among a host of other things, whether the ultraviolet rays of the sun could penetrate the planet's thick cloud cover. He saw now that they not only could, but did. The man and the woman were unquestionably members of a white-skinned race, and both possessed suntans so deep and golden that in contrast their dark blue eyes seemed even darker and their bright blonde hair even brighter. Their white knee-length tunics augmented the effect, and in cooperation with their handsome faces supplied them with a god and goddess-like aspect. Unfortunately, this aspect was somewhat marred by their one concession to personal adornment, gleaming neckbands forged from a copper-like metal. As neither native appeared to be armed, Gordon saw no cause for alarm, and after his initial surprise he regarded them quite calmly. So did Sonia Mikhailovna. This time, however, the two Venusians did not reciprocate. Their eyes had grown wide, and now an unmistakable expression of disbelief settled upon their handsome faces. At length the man touched his own neck, and then the woman's. Then he pointed, almost accusingly it seemed, toward Gordon and Sonia, and demanded something in an unintelligible tongue. Gordon proceeded to touch his own neck. Next he touched Sonia's, ever so lightly, of course. "Gordon," he said. "Sonia." He was rewarded for his perspicacity by 2 horrified stares and a pair of hoarse gasps. Then, before he could utter another word, the 2 Venusians turned and vanished into the forest. He stared after them. So did Sonia Mikhailovna. "Did you know," he asked presently, "that Venus was inhabited?" "Our scientists suspected that it might be," she shrugged. "Anyway, what does it matter now? By your stupid action you destroyed whatever chance we had of establishing friendly relations." Gordon felt his face grow hot. "When you meet aliens, the first thing you always do is exchange names with them," he said. "Everybody knows that." "Everybody who reads your stereotyped science fiction knows it, you mean? And after you find out their names, you say, 'Take me to your leader,' and their leader turns out to be a big, beautiful blonde who is stacked. Well, I think I will be getting back to my ship." "I don't see anybody stopping you," Gordon said. She gave him a long look. In the roseate radiance of the Venusian afternoon, her face had a pink-cheeked little girl aspect. "In imperialistic idiom, that means, I suppose, that it is a matter of complete indifference to you what I do." "It sure does," Gordon said. "Well, I'll be seeing you." Leaving her standing by the brook, he re-entered the forest and struck out over the little hills that rolled back from the littoral-like green inland waves to break riotously against the high ridge that encompassed the island's interior. In his initial enthusiasm, he had wandered farther from his ship than he had meant to, and he had been about to turn back when he had seen the girl. Now he had another reason for returning. A dark cloud was due to arrive over Washington in the very near future, and it was up to him to send out a bad weather warning. Multicolored flowers carpeted virtually every square inch of the forest floor. Finch-like birds of rainbow hues darted overhead, leaving exquisite wakes of song. Squirrel-like mammals spiraled tree trunks so swiftly that they were barely visible. Venus had turned out to be the Venus of the romantics, rather than the Venus of the scientists. And Gordon, who, for all his scientific training, was a romantic himself, found the eventuality exhilarating, even in his present doldrums. Perhaps when man reached Mars, he would find blue canals after all, no matter what the scientists said to the contrary, and fragile glass cities tinkling in cinnamon-scented winds. The day was nearly done when he reached the cove near the shore of which his spaceship stood. and darkness was upon him by the time he climbed the metal Jacob's ladder and stepped through the lock. In blithe disregard of learned opinion, Venus's rotation period approximated Earth's. However, her cloud cover brought about an abrupt and early departure of daylight. In his haste, he did not bother to close the lock, but headed straight for the radio alcove and beamed the news of his historic meeting with Major Sonia Mikhailovna across the immensities to Space Force headquarters at New Canaveral, appending it with the information that the peoples of Earth could no longer consider themselves the sole inheritors of the solar system. Owing to the distance involved, over 5 minutes elapsed before he received a reply. He was informed that the USSR had already released the news of the new space victory and that the Soviet Premier had declared a national holiday in honor of the occasion. New Canaveral also provided him with an unsolicited thumbnail biography of Major Sonia Mikhailovna. Her father, Petr, was a famous Russian pianist. She was 23 years of age, unmarried, spoke 6 languages fluently, had a nodding acquaintance with 11 more, held a doctor's degree in anthropology, was an accomplished ballerina, and in the last Olympic Games had won the gold medal in the gymnastics competition. She had been chosen for the Venus shot from a group of 100 trained women volunteers, and the rank of major had been bestowed upon her in honor of her service to her country. Also, Gordon heard the footsteps then, and whirled around. But the 3 Venusians who had crowded into the little control room were upon him before he could draw his pistol. They relieved him of it quickly and tossed it to one side. Then 2 of them held him while the 3rd covered his nose and mouth with a wet cloth that reeked of a cloying perfume. He blacked out in a matter of seconds. A new day was dawning when he climbed out of the deep well of drug-induced unconsciousness and opened his eyes. His wrists and ankles were bound, and he was lying on a stretcher fashioned of lashed-together saplings. It was being carried by 2 gold-skinned Venusians, one of whom was a male member of the couple who had come upon him and Sonia the previous afternoon. He raised his head. Apparently the perfume he had inhaled possessed only part of the properties of chloroform. In any event, he felt no ill effects. Turning his head, he discovered that his captors consisted of about 24 natives, all told, and that every one of them wore a metal collar. Half of them were women, and one of the women was the one he and Sonia had seen the day before. There was another stretcher just behind his own. Sonia Mikhailovna's face was hidden, but he could see her horse chestnut-colored hair. "Are you all right?" he called. She did not answer. Clearly the captors had used the same drug on her that they had used on him, and she was still under its influence. A number of other things were also clear. The 2 original Venusians had been part of a larger group, an excursion party perhaps, and after vanishing into the forest, they had rejoined the main body and reported his and Sonia's presence. The decision to capture them must have been made shortly afterward. The trees thinned out on Gordon's right, providing him with a glimpse of distant blue-misted hills and grey-blue sea, and bringing home the realization that he was being borne along the lofty inland ridge that circled the island's interior. For the first time since he had opened his eyes, fear touched him. In less than 2 months, Venus would approach to within 30 million miles of Earth, the distance which the Space Force technicians had used in computing his return trajectory and in estimating the amount of fuel he would need. In all probability, Sonia's return trajectory and fuel supply had been similarly computed and estimated, and if so, she was in the same boat he was. If they were kept captive for any length of time, they might not be able to return to Earth for another year, and while it was conceivable that they might be able to live off the land after their supplies gave out, it was far from likely. Maybe, though, eating wouldn't be a problem. Dead people are as unable to eat as they are unable to tell tales. The trees thinned out again, on its left this time, and he saw a bowl-shaped valley far below. There were green fields and blue lakes and scattered clusters of white buildings. Villages, no doubt. They weren't large enough to have registered on his viewscope during his orbit, but they were large enough to register on his retina now. The faint trail which the Venusians had been following began zigzagging down the side of the ridge, and the going became more difficult. They kept glancing uneasily at the sky, as though they momentarily expected it to fall down upon them. Gordon could discern no cause for their concern. As far as he could see, the sky was the same hazy pink it had been yesterday. But then, he was not a Venusian, and consequently knew nothing about such matters. At the foot of the ridge, the procession was joined by other natives, indicating that a courier had been sent ahead to herald its approach. All of the newcomers wore metal collars, and all of them looked at Gordon and Sonia briefly, then quickly glanced away. Sonia, Gordon saw, turning his head, had awakened and was regarding her surroundings with eyes that seemed to have even more harebell blue in them than before. "Are you all right?" he called again.
"Yes," she said, after a pause. "I am all right."
One of the nearer villages proved to be the captor's destination, and after passing between several neatly laid out fields, the principal crop of which appeared to be a Venusian form of sweet corn, the procession started down a narrow thoroughfare in the direction of a large circular stone building, surmounted by a steeple-like chimney from which smoke arose in a tenuous blue-white column. The buildings on either side of the street were plain to the point of bleakness, the facades featureless save for oval windows and narrow doorways. Villagers were everywhere, and all of them, men and women alike, sported metal collars. Children, however, were noticeably absent, though once Gordon caught sight of a round, wide-eyed face in one of the oval windows. He had to look fast to see it, though, because an instant later a woman appeared and yanked the child back out of sight. He was more bewildered than ever. Obviously, judging from their reactions, the Venusians considered him and Sonia to be guilty of some manner of immoral crime. But the only crime they had committed that he could think of was trespassing, and certainly trespassing couldn't be construed as immoral. What in the world had they done then? The procession had reached the large circular structure, and was filing through its vaulted entrance. Terraced tiers of stone benches encircled a small flagstone-paved arena, in the centre of which were two altar-like stone blocks, placed about 5 feet apart. Just behind the blocks stood a primitive forge, and beside the forge stood an even more primitive anvil. A gold-skinned blacksmith was busily operating a pair of crude bellows. Gordon and Sonia were placed on the blocks and strapped down by means of leather thongs. The tiers of benches filled rapidly, and an air of expectation rapidly permeated the smoky atmosphere. Gordon began to sweat, a reaction due partly, but not wholly, to the heat thrown off by the forge. Sonia's face was white. He tried to think of something reassuring to say to her, but for the life of him he couldn't. Quite by accident, his eyes met hers, and to his consternation her cheeks changed from white to pink, and she turned abruptly away. The audience began to chant, and presently a man of noble mien appeared, bearing 2 strips of copper-like metal. He handed them to the blacksmith, and then stepped back and took up a position equidistant from each block, after which he proceeded to look sternly down first into Gordon's face and then into Sonia's. Gordon couldn't see what the blacksmith was doing in the meantime, but judging from the sounds the man was making, he was busily occupied. Bellows wheezed and coals crackled, and metal clanged on metal as though a Venusian Tarnhelm was in the works. Gordon knew perfectly well, however, that one wasn't, and he wasn't particularly surprised when, a little while later, a water-soaked cloth was wrapped around his neck and was followed by one of the two metal strips. Steam rose from the wet cloth as the blacksmith held the two ends of the strip together until they fused, and even more steam arose when he tempered the resultant seam with a container of water. The job completed to his satisfaction, he removed the cloth and let the still warm collar settle against Gordon's neck. The other strip was similarly fused around Sonia's neck, after which a man of noble mien went into action. Raising his hand in a signal for the audience to cease its chanting, he launched a long sonorous speech, part of which he directed at Gordon, and part of which he directed at Sonia. After a ringing peroration, during which he seemed to threaten each of them, he produced a pinch of white powder and sprinkled some of it over each of their heads. Finally he drew a long double-edged knife. Well, this is it, Gordon thought. But it wasn't. The man of noble mien merely used the knife to cut their bonds. Then, after untying the thongs that secured them to the stone blocks, he raised both arms in a gesture for them to stand up. Gordon massaged his legs before putting his weight on them, and Sonia followed the same precaution. He could hardly believe that they were still alive, but seemingly they were. And healthy, too, if the pinkness of Sonia's cheeks was an accurate criterion. The man of noble mien nodded his noble head in the direction of the entrance, and they accompanied him outside. Gordon did a double-take when they stepped into the street. It was strewn with freshly picked flowers of every hue and description, and lined by little children waving green twigs that resembled olive branches. He came to a staring stop. "Won't someone please tell me what's coming off?" he said. Sonia stopped beside him. "Don't you really know?" she asked, her eyes fixed on a flower at her feet that was almost as red as her face had become. "I know we're the focal point of some kind of ceremony, but what kind of a ceremony is it?" Slowly Sonia raised her eyes. "It's a wedding ceremony," she said. They married us." The flower carpet stretched all the way to the outskirts of the village, and so did the two lines of little children. Gordon stumbled along at Sonia's side, hopeful that he would wake up any second in the bachelors' barracks at New Canaveral. But the street stubbornly refused to dissipate, and so did the little children and the man of noble mien. As for Sonia, much less than dissipating, she took on added detail, and the metal collar around her neck seemed to throw off flame after lambent flame, and each one was brighter than its predecessor. The man of noble mien escorted them outside the village, then turned his back on them as though they no longer existed, and returned the way he had come. After his passage, the little children broke ranks and began playing in the flowers. Gordon faced Sonia. "Now maybe you'll tell me why they married us," he said. "I will tell you on the way back to our ships." She did not speak again till they reached the top of the ridge. Then, after she got her breath back, she said, "They married us because, underneath their demigod exteriors, they are nothing more than Bronze-Age Puritans. Yesterday, when the man and woman saw us standing together by the brook, they were bewildered because neither of us was wearing what to them is a universal symbol of marriage, a metal collar, and when you touched me, they were shocked. You see, in their society, no man and woman can be alone together unless they are married, and it is unthinkable for a man to touch a woman unless she is his wife, or some immediate member of his family." "We could have been brother and sister," Gordon pointed out. "Do I look like your sister?" He had to admit that she didn't. "Anyway," Sonia went on, "their trailing us to different houses must have convinced them, and the rest of their party, that we are not. In the eyes of the Venusians, you see, our spaceships are just that, houses.
Odd ones, perhaps, by their architectural standards, but houses just the same. How else could a simple Bronze Age culture interpret them?
Gordon ducked beneath a blossom-laden bough.
How did you know they're Puritans? I didn't, at first. I merely assumed, from their reactions to us, that they must be, and then I got to thinking about how neither the sun nor the moon can be seen through the cloud cover, and it occurred to me that their concept of one god must have come much earlier in their civilization than would have been the case on Earth, owing to the fact that there could have been no intermediate phase of sun or moon worship. Perhaps, somewhere along the line, they had a Christ whose teachings they misinterpreted, and no doubt they have a version of Genesis similar to the Judeo-Christian one, except that in theirs the problem of creating the sun and the moon and the stars never arose. Anyway, now that they have married us, they are no longer interested in us. All that concerned them was our moral welfare. It seems to be growing dark.
It can't be, Gordon said. It's only a little past noon, which reminds me, I skipped breakfast and supper too. He pulled 2 concentrated food biscuits out of his fatigue-old pockets. I suggest that we stop for lunch. They sat down side by side beneath a tree with blue blossoms shaped like Dutchman's breeches hanging from its boughs. They were halfway down the opposite slope of the ridge now, but Sonia's ship was still many hours away, and his was an hour farther yet. They ate silently for a while. Then,
"There is one thing that puzzles me," Sonia said.
"Yes?"
"Why did they marry us so soon? Why was there such a need for haste?"
"You made it clear enough. They misinterpreted our behaviour and were shocked out of their self-righteous puritanical skins." She shook her head.
"Shocked, yes, but not enough to have rushed us through a ceremony that under ordinary circumstances would have required days of preparation. There must have been another reason."
Suddenly she glanced up through the foliage of the sky.
"It is growing dark."
There was no longer any denying the fact. The roseate radiance of the youthful afternoon had transmuted to a sort of grey murk. Moreover, the air had grown appreciably colder. Gordon stood up. "I think we'd better be on our way," he said. "It's going to rain." A good 3 hours passed, however, before he felt the first drop. He and Sonia were in the hills now, and the ridge was far behind them. The rain was gentle, but it was persistent too, and both of them were soaked before another hour had gone by.
"We will go to my ship," Sonia said, brushing back a rain-wet strand of horse-chestnut-coloured hair from her forehead. "It is much closer than yours."
Somehow, her offering him shelter in a Soviet ship did not strike him as being in the least incongruous. And when, a moment later, he slipped his arm around her waist, that didn't seem incongruous either. And when she permitted it to remain there, even that didn't seem incongruous. For some crazy mixed-up reason, life seemed singularly devoid of incongruities all of a sudden, and amazingly forthright and simple. The rain was extremely penetrating. So penetrating, in fact, that it penetrated his skin as well as his clothing. And it had a curious lulling effect. No, that wasn't the word. A curious soporific effect. No, that wasn't the word either. Well, what word was it then? He couldn't call it to mind till after they reached Sonia's ship and were standing at the base of the Jacob's ladder. By then it was too late. By then he was gazing softly down into her eyes, and she was gazing softly up into his, and the world was well on its way toward being well lost. He tried to force himself to step back and regard the situation with the cold and objective eye of a scientist, to evaluate the strange and wondrous quality that fell in the form of rain, and to tie it in with the Venusian's motivation in marrying him and Sonia post-haste. In vain. All he could think of was the tune she had been humming by the brook and the hole she had seen in one of her cheap cotton stockings. And then she was in his arms, and he was kissing her rain-wet lips, and Washington and Moscow were forgotten place names on a map that had no more meaning than the paper it was printed on. The rain continued to fall, softly, gently, insistently. It sang soft songs in the leaves. It murmured, it whispered, it laughed. It did not cease till morning. After starting back to his ship, Gordon mentally rehearsed the report which he and Sonia had agreed to send to their respective headquarters. It described briefly how they had been captured and released, but discreetly made no reference either to the wedding ceremony or to the rain. They had unanimously agreed that the situation was complicated enough without complicating it further. He had gone less than half a mile when his collar began to press against his throat. Thereafter, the pressure increased with every step he took, till finally he came to a semi-strangled stop. It was as though he had reached the end of an invisible leash. The pressure lessened after he backed up a few paces, went away altogether after he backed up a dozen more. There was only one explanation. The metal from which his and Sonia's collars, as well as those of the Venusians, had been forged, possessed magnetic properties unknown to terrestrial metals, and the attraction between objects fashioned from it grew progressively stronger as the square of the distance between them increased. Either the Venusians had disciplined this attraction so that it was limited to objects fashioned from the same stock, or the ore from which the metal was processed was naturally subdivided into small magnetically independent veins. Gordon did not know which was the case, but there was one thing he did know. When the Venusians married you, they meant business. He began retracing his steps back to Sonia's ship. Halfway there, he saw her running toward him. Her white face told him that her collar had been giving her a hard time too, and that she had arrived at a conclusion similar to his own. "Gordon, what are we going to do?" she gasped when she came up to him. "We'll get them off some way," he reassured her. "Come on, I've got the necessary tools in my ship." He tried all morning before he gave up. The collars were impervious to his best shears, and his hardest file failed to scratch the surface. Using his acetylene torch was out of the question. He sat disconsolately down on the ground several feet from one of the landing jacks. Sonia sat down beside him. "We won't be able to go back at all now," she said. "Neither your ship nor mine can carry us both, and there's no way we can occupy more than one of them at a time." Gordon sighed. "I suppose we could radio for help," he said presently. "But if we did, we'd have to tell them everything that happened. I'm afraid they'd be sort of skeptical about the rain. Of course, we could leave that part out, but I'm afraid they'd be skeptical about the collars too. In fact, I don't think they'd even believe us. They'd simply jump to the conclusion that we don't want to return, and would order us back on the double the minute maximum juxtaposition occurred. No, if we radio for help, we've got to have a good concrete reason for doing so, one that they'll be able to understand and believe." Sonia managed a wan smile. I can just see myself standing before the Council of Ministers, blaming what happened on the rain," she said. Gordon laughed. "And I can just see myself standing before a Congressional Investigating Committee, explaining about the collars." He began to feel better. A situation that could lend itself to humour could not be wholly hopeless. "Here's what we'll do for now," he went on. "We'll radio back the report we agreed upon, and then we'll go on with our work as though nothing is wrong. Sometimes problems solve themselves, but just in case this one shouldn't, and we can't go back, we'll build a cabin so we'll have some place to live."
Sonia's eyes sparkled like a little girl's. "Let's build it by that little brook," she said. Where we first met." "Fine," Gordon said. During the ensuing weeks, they spent their mornings gathering data and their afternoons working on the cabin. They took time out to analyze a sample of rainwater, but it evinced no unusual qualities. Gordon was not surprised. Shortly after landing, he had tested a sample of Venusian water for drinking purposes, and with the same result. Clearly, the quality that had undermined their inhibitions originated in the cloud cover and evaporated soon after it reached the ground. After the cabin was finished, they began going on afternoon hikes into the hills, tramping through idyllic woods, talking and laughing, exclaiming now and then at unexpected patterns of flowers, starting at sudden rainbow flights of birds. They saw but few Venusians, and the few they did see ignored them. One afternoon they found a fern-bordered pool beneath a white-skirted waterfall, and after that they came there every day to swim. Sonia's skin darkened to a deep gold, and looking at her, Gordon sometimes found it hard to breathe. Every so often the sky darkened, and rain fell, but the rain was superfluous now. And as for the invisible magnetic chain that bound them together, that had been supplanted by another invisible chain that was 10 times as strong. And yet the original one still remained, and the problem it represented grew more and more acute as their scheduled departure times approached. They desperately needed a good practical reason to give their respective governments for not returning to Earth, and quite providentially at the very last moment, though it seemed anything but providential at the time, they discovered that they had one, or rather, Sonia did. On the morning of the day she was scheduled to undergo the rigours of acceleration, she regarded Gordon shyly across the little breakfast table he had built. I am going to have a baby," she said. The news, when it arrived in Moscow, had something of the impact of a hydrogen bomb, and when it leaked through a hitherto unsuspected crevice in the Kremlin, there was a sort of chain reaction throughout the entire Soviet Union. It was at this point in his political career that the Soviet Premier discovered a universal truth. People the world over, whether they be communistic or capitalistic, have a very large soft spot in their hearts when it comes to babies. That spring, Venus outshone herself and hung in the evening sky over Moscow somewhat in the manner of the star over Bethlehem. The Premier had a haunted look on his face when he appeared before the Council of Ministers. He was not alone. The ministers had haunted looks on their faces too. What did you do when you had to cope with a forthcoming space baby who would be half capitalist and half communist, and who was already adored by the whole world? The Premier did not know. But there was one thing he did know. In the last analysis, any party is the people, and while you can con the people into believing that black bread is white bread, and that caraway seeds are caviar, you cannot con them into believing that a child conceived on the planet of love by a Russian girl and an American boy is anything other than a harbinger of peace. So in the long run, what the Premier did was the only thing he could have done. He arranged a summit meeting with the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and for the first time in history, the East and the West really got together. The threat of war could not, of course, be totally eliminated at such short notice, but a number of aggravations that could precipitate a war could be eliminated, and were. This accomplished, the three leaders drew up plans for a super three-man spacecraft to be built post-haste by the best engineers the three nations could supply, and unanimously agreed that the pilot would be English, the obstetrician Russian, and the nurse American. It has been said
that after the meeting the Soviet Premier and the President of the United States got together and began thinking up names. This is extremely doubtful. Anyway, if they did, they were wasting their time, for Sonia Mikhailovna and Gordon Andrews had already taken care of the matter. The name they chose is well known today, except perhaps by those for whom this history has been recorded, which brings us back to the aforementioned news bulletin. In common with most news bulletins, it has about as much poetry in it as an old shoe, but its message shines forth with a radiance that excels even the radiance cast by the star over Moscow. Geneva, Switzerland, September 11, 1996. The young Russo-American ambassador-at-large, Petr Gordonovich Andrews, announced this morning that his peace plan has been accepted by all major and minor powers, and that the war that has threatened mankind for the past half-century can no longer occur.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
Fairyland Planet by John Silletto. Originally published in Infinity, October 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Chapter 1. He was about 38 years old, Earth scale, with a sprinkling of premature grey in his thick hair. His stride as he came toward the desk had a youthful bounce, but his eyes were a little less bright than I was accustomed to here in Fairyland. His brows were pulled slightly inward, and he wasn't smiling. "Hi, Mike One," I said. "Good morning, Daddy." Very formal and solemn. A bad sign, I thought. I gave him a big reassuring grin and waved him into a chair. "This is a pleasant surprise, Mike One. I hardly ever have a caller during ice cream recess." He squirmed in the chair, looking down at his feet. I could come back later, Daddy." No, I said hastily. "That's all right. A fellow must have something pretty important on his mind to bring him all the way up to Daddy's office at ice cream time." Mike One fidgeted. He tugged at a lock of hair and began to twist it. "Well?" "Come on," I cajoled. "What's it all about? That's what Daddy's here for, you know, to listen to your troubles." He scuffed his feet around on the floor. Then he took out a handkerchief and blew his nose. "Well, see, I got a buddy. Well, he ain't really my best buddy, or even second best. Sometimes we play chess together, or checkers, only he thinks checkers is silly." I cleared my throat and smiled patiently, waiting for him to come to the point. When he didn't go on, I said, "What's his name?" Adam." "Adam 2 or 3? "2. I nodded. "Okay, go on." "He talks crazy, and he always wondering about things. I never seen a kid so wonder so much, and he's only 23. I nodded again. "And now he's got you to wondering about something, and you want Daddy to straighten you out, right?" "Uh-huh." "Okay," I said. "Shoot." He sniffed and scuffed his feet and scrooched around in the chair some more. Then suddenly he opened his eyes wide and looked me square in the face and blurted, "Is there really a Santa Claus?" The grin I was wearing froze on my face. It seemed I'd been waiting 20 years for one of the kids to ask me that question. "Daddy, is there a Santa Claus?" A loaded question. Loaded and fused and capable of blasting the Fairyland experiment into space dust. Mike One was waiting for an answer. I had to deal with the crisis of the moment and worry about implications later. I stood up and walked around the desk and put my hands on his shoulders. "Mike," I said, "how many Christmases can you remember?" "Gee, Daddy, I don't know. Lots and lots." "Let's see now. You're 38, and Christmas comes twice a year, so that's 2 times 38. 76 Christmases. Of course, you can't remember all of them, but the ones you remember, did you ever not see Santa Claus, Mike? No, Daddy, I always saw him. Well then, why come asking me if there is such a person when you know there is because you see him all the time? Mike 1 looked more uncomfortable than ever. Well, Adam 2 says he don't think there is a cold side of number 1, son. He thinks it's hot all the way round, and if that's so, then Santa Claus couldn't live there. He says he thinks Santa Claus is just pretend, and you or somebody from the Council of Uncles dresses up that way at Christmas time. I scowled. How the devil had Adam 2 managed to figure that one out? Listen, Mike, I said. You trust your daddy, don't you? Golly, course I do. All right, then. There is a Santa Claus, Mike 1. He's as real as you or me, or the pink clouds, or the green rain. He's as real as Fairyland itself. So just don't pay any more attention to Adam 2 and his crazy notions, okay? He grinned and stood up, blinking his eyes to hold back the tears. Thank you, Daddy. I clapped him on the back. You're welcome, pal. Now if you hurry, you might just get back down in time for a dish of ice cream. When the indicator of the elevator door told me that Mike 1 had been safely deposited at the bottom of Daddy's tower, I walked across the circular office to the windows facing the compound. Ice cream recess was about over, and the kids were straggling out in all directions from the peppermint-striped ice cream and candy factory just to the right of the midway entrance. Except for the few whose turn it was to learn something new in Mummy's schoolroom, they were on their own from now until lunchtime. It was free play period. From my 100-foot-high vantage point, I watched them go, walking, running, skipping or hopping toward their favourite play spots. They had their choice of the slides and swings in the playground, the swimming pool, tennis courts, ball diamond, gridiron, golf course, bowling alley, and skating rinks, and of course the rides on the midway. I watched them go, and my heart thumped a little faster. My gang, I thought. Not really mine, of course, except from the standpoint of responsibility, but I couldn't have loved them more if I'd sired each and every one of them. And Mummy, sometimes I almost forgot her name was Ruth, felt the same way. It was a funny thing, this paternal feeling, even a little weird if I stopped to remember that a baker's dozen of them were actually older than I. But a child is still a child, whatever his chronological age may be, and the inhabitants of Fairyland were children in every sense except the physical. It was a big job being daddy to so many kids, but one that had set lightly on my shoulders so far. They were a wonderful gang, healthy and happy, really happy, and I couldn't think of a single place in the universe where you'd find another 137 human beings about whom you could make that statement. A wonderful gang, all sizes and shapes and personalities, ranging in physical age from 5 to 43. Mental age, well, that was another story. After years of research and experimentation, we'd settled on 8 as the optimum of mental development. And so, there wasn't a kid in Fairyland mentally older than 8 years. Or was there? Mike 1's confused story of his friend Adam 2 re-echoed in my head. He says he don't think there is a cold side of number 1, son. He thinks it's hot all the way round. He says he thinks Santa Claus is just pretend. Something was wrong. Something big and important and dangerous, and I didn't know what I was going to do about it. Adam 2, unlike some of the older kids, had been born in Fairyland. There wasn't one single solitary thing in his life history to account for this sudden terrifying curiosity and insight. Nothing. Not even prenatal influence, if there is such a thing. I wondered if Ruth had noticed anything strange about him. If so, she'd never mentioned it. I decided I'd better have a daddy and son chat with young Adam right away. I walked through the midway in the warm twin-star sunshine, waving and shouting back at the kids on the rides who shrieked, "Hi, Daddy!" as they caught sight of me. Nobody had seen Adam too, so I escaped after a brief roller coaster ride. "Oh, come on, Daddy, just once," with a trio of husky 30-year-olds who called themselves the Three Bears. Adam too wasn't at the playground either, nor the swimming pool, nor the tennis courts. I decided he must be in the recreation hall, so headed in that direction, taking a shortcut through Pretty Park at the north end of the midway. The park was a big place, stretching east and west from the baseball diamond to the pony stables at the edge of Camping Woods, and northwards as far as the golf course. This was my favourite spot in Fairyland. I always came here when I wanted to relax or think something through without any interruptions. It had once been an oasis on this otherwise barren desert planet, and therefore the logical site for the Fairyland compound. An underground spring in the centre of the park was our main water supply. The clear, cold fluid bubbled out of the rocks to form a lovely lake which was perhaps 50 yards across at the widest part. The lake shore was ringed with tall, unearthly palm-like trees, strange and beautiful. I found Adam too there, beside the lake, sitting on a rock with his shoes and socks off, dangling his bare feet in the cold water and gazing upward into the swaying treetops. "Hi, Adam too." "Hello." He didn't seem either surprised or glad to see me. He was above average height, well over 6 feet, and exceptionally thin. Physically awkward, too, I remembered. He invariably struck out on the bull diamond, invariably sliced into the rough on the golf course. His hair was dark and curly, and he had a nervous way of ruffling it with his fingers, so that it was always in disarray. But the most unusual thing about him was his eyes. They were ice blue, set deep back under a high, ridged forehead. They stared out at you with a kind of ruthless, unblinking intensity that made you uncomfortable, and I wondered why I'd never noticed those eyes before. It was like looking at a stranger, though I'd known him since he was little more than a baby. I sat down alongside him on the rock. "What you doing?" He didn't answer for a while. His bare feet made white froth in the water. At last he said, "Thinking." I waited, but apparently he wasn't going to elaborate. "I hear tell you've been doing some of your thinking out loud," I said quietly. No answer. "It's all right to think," I went on. "That's good for us. But a fella ought to be careful about sounding off to the other kids about something maybe he don't know anything about." Still no answer. He kept lashing the water with his feet. His indifference and lack of attention were beginning to annoy me, and I was annoyed at myself for being annoyed with him and for beating around the bush with him. "What makes the trees grow?" His query was so sudden and unexpected that it caught me off guard. That made me more annoyed than ever. "You're supposed to have learned that from Mummy in school," I said curtly. Another long pause. "She says the fairies touch the trees and flowers with their magic wands. She says that's what makes them grow." "That's right." "I don't believe in fairies," he said matter-of-factly. I scowled fiercely at him. "Oh, you don't, eh? First it's Santa Claus, now the fairies. The next thing we know you'll stop believing in mummies and daddies." He looked up into the treetops again. "I think the sun has something to do with it," he went on, as though I hadn't said a word. "They seem to be sort of reaching for the sun, as if the sun gave them life." His eyes met mine, cold and intensely blue, and very frank. "Why don't you tell me the truth?" I stood up, fighting to control my rising anger. "Are you calling your daddy a liar?" I shouted. "I only asked a simple question." "All right. I was regaining a little of my composure, but it was evident that I needed more time to think this through. Let's just forget it for now. Let's go over to the rec hall and have a game of chess, shall we? Adam was chess champ of Fairyland. Splash, splash, splash. His feet fluttered wildly in the water again. I can't, he said. Splash, splash, splash. I raised my eyebrows. Why not? I'm not through thinking. What it needs is a spanking, I thought grimly. But spankings were outlawed in Fairyland. They were old-fashioned and conducive to the generation of neurosis. I'd never considered the regulation as a handicap. Until now. Okay, fella, I said with exaggerated calm. But just let me hear one more report. Just one, mind you, about you telling the kids there's no Santa Claus or no fairies, and you'll be on the no ice cream list for a month. Splash, splash, splash. I get tired of ice cream every day. I stalked away, not trusting myself to speak. That night, after the kids were bedded down in the dormitories, Mummy and I stretched out in our lounge chairs to watch the videocast from Earth. The news was dull, the kind that reminds you history repeats itself, and so what? The Martian colony was complaining about taxes and threatening to secede. The campaign for Galaxy Manager was in full swing, and the network was allotting equal mudslinging and empty promise time to each party. The Solar Congress had doubled the defense budget for next year, and an unconfirmed report had been received that an unidentified spaceship had landed on the dark side of Earth's moon. I yawned and switched off the set. Why the hell does anybody want to live on Earth? I said. Ruth smiled at me, a sympathetic wifely smile. She'd been watching me all evening, and she knew something wasn't right. What's the matter, Harry? I sighed. Tell me about Adam too. Oh, him. Yeah, him. She looked a little embarrassed. I didn't suppose you knew. Did he tell you? Now I was confused. Did he tell me what? She stood up suddenly. Stop sparring with me, Harry. Did he tell you or not? Tell me what? I almost shouted it this time. That he asked me to play house with him. Ruth! She laughed a little shakily. Don't get hysterical, Daddy. I didn't do it. I slumped in my seat. That's encouraging. What do you suppose is the matter with him, Harry? I was about to ask you the same thing, I said. I never thought of him as being much different from the rest. A little more shy, maybe, and a little less exuberant on the physical side. Not enough to worry about, though. How's he in school? She frowned. He's in the 5th year of 3rd grade now, an above-average student, and very inquisitive, and kind of shy, like you said. I always thought he was well-adjusted, although I don't think he ever plays house with the same girl twice. I just never thought of him as a problem until today. That question. Yeah, I said wryly. He seems to be full of questions. I told her about my visit from Mike 1 and the chat with Adam. Well, Mummy, I said, it looks like after all these years it's finally happening. What's finally happening, Daddy? I sighed. One of our kids is growing up. Chapter 2. I suppose it was partly my fault that the Adam 2 business very nearly got out of hand during the next few days. In the first place, I was at a loss to know what to do about him, and in the second place, I was sweating day and night over the blankety-blanked annual report for the Council of Uncles, who were due to arrive the following week. I hated paperwork, with the result that I usually got caught short and had to compress a whole year's work into the space of a few days. The Council of Uncles, of course, wasn't really any such thing. The title was just a nickname for the benefit of the kids. Officially, they were the Intergalactic Inspection Council of the Solar Committee for Sociological Research. The purpose of the committee was to find out what people need to be happy, and the purpose of the inspection council was to check around and see who was happy and who wasn't. Some 200 years ago, society had reached a kind of static condition in the realm of scientific development. For the first time in 7,000 years of civilization, man was faced with almost total leisure, and to his great surprise, he found himself no nearer happiness than when he started. And so a crusade had begun. Man decided at last to turn his knack for research and development inward upon himself. Scientists began to ponder and experiment with the questions that had plagued philosophers for ages. The coming of automation had relieved men from the burden of working for a living, and left them with a choice between cultural pursuits and pure recreation. Which should it be? A good deal of rivalry, some friendly and some otherwise, existed between the proponents of the two major schools of thought. The intellectuals were dubbed highbrows. The pleasure boys were known as happy hooligans. Mankind, the highbrows contended, was still undergoing a kind of evolution, a gradual transition from a purely physical or animal existence to a purely mental or intellectual state. The machines had released him from physical bondage, as they had been intended to do, so that he might rise at last above his animal beginnings. Man could now rise to undreamed-of cultural heights, or he could sink into the depths of sensual degradation. The choice was up to him, but if he chose the latter, nature might very well not permit him to survive. "Fiddle-de-dee," said the hooligans. The trouble with man was that he has always insisted on pretending to be something he isn't, always seeking some deep meaning and significance in life instead of relaxing and enjoying it. Excessive doses of education and culture merely serve to compound this felony, magnify his inferiority complex, and make him thoroughly unhappy. "Teach people how to enjoy themselves instead of how to be miserable," they cried. Fairyland was a sort of sociological laboratory for the happy hooligans, a colossal, costly experiment that had been going on for some 45 years. It was designed to test the theory that most of the misery in the world stems from the fact that kids are allowed to grow up, to abandon their childhood dreams, to quit having fun. They learn that there really isn't any Santa Claus, and they never quite recover from the shock. So far, the experiment appeared to be a successful one. Fairyland kids were happy kids, and they all believe in Santa Claus. All but one. On day one of that ill-starred week, the merry-go-round on the Midway broke down. Investigation disclosed that Adam too had found my toolkit and had disassembled the remote control drive mechanism to find out what makes it go. He was placed on half rations of ice cream for a period of 10 days. On day 2, Adam was discovered late at night, after taps, in the washroom of the boys' dorm, swearing in applicants for Question and Answer Club. When questioned as to the purpose of his so-called club, he refused to answer. His charter members, however, confessed eagerly. The club was to dream up among themselves a question of the week. Questions were to be presented weekly to Mummy and Daddy, and unless satisfactory answers were forthcoming, the club members would refuse to eat. The first question of the week was, why are there two kinds of kids, boys and girls? Adam too was placed on no dessert at dinner for a period of 1 week. On day 5, Adam was missing from his bed at taps. He had not registered to spend the night playing house in one of the cottages in Pretty Park either, so I set out to find him. It took me an hour and a half, but I finally located him on the far side of the golf course. He was attacking the Great Wall of Fairyland. The Great Wall, over 100 feet high, surrounded the entire compound. It was encased in a pseudo-gravity field with a repellent force of -3G, and you could no more approach the Great Wall than you could fly. I watched in stunned amazement as Adam too, the kid who despised football, time after time took a running start, lowered his head, and charged at the wall like a varsity tackler, only to be thrown for a 5-yard loss. When I gathered he had no intention of giving up until he dropped from exhaustion, I walked over to where the G-field had thrown him after his last lunge. "Adam, what are you trying to do?" He stood up, breathing heavily, and brushed himself off. "I wanted to see what was on the other side." "There's nothing nice over there," I said. "It's a bad place. Fairyland is a much nicer place to be." "I wanted to see for myself." His voice was as devoid of emotion as his face. "Why can't I get near the wall? What is it that throws me back?" "The fairies have cast a spell on the wall," I said. "A magic spell, because they don't want us to go to the bad place. They want us to stay in Fairyland where we're happy." Abruptly, Adam started off across the golf course toward the dormitory. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, Daddy." Adam, too, was placed on limited midway privileges for a period of 4 days. All of which gave me an uneasy and alien feeling of helplessness. My self-confidence, based on 20 years' experience with the kids of Fairyland, and before that 5 years' experience as a space scoutmaster on Earth, was visibly shaken. Adam wasn't just being ornery, the way almost any kid is likely to be at times. If it had been just that, the loss of privileges would have remedied the situation. Neither was he actually malicious. He obviously wasn't out to harm anyone. He was simply curious. Curious in a way that was distinctly unhealthy for the rest of Fairyland. He was growing up, and I didn't know how to cope with him. So I wrote him up in the annual report. Chapter 3. It was a big day in Fairyland whenever the Council of Uncles came. Bigger in a way than either Christmas or circus time, because they came twice a year, and the Council of Uncles only once. I'd adjusted the controls of the weather generators the night before so that arrival day dawned warm and clear. The kids were all dressed in Sunday best, and the festival flags were flying from the tops of all the buildings. Across the side of Daddy's tower that faced the desert and spaceport, a gay multicolored banner constructed by the 3rd graders proclaimed, "Welcome, Uncles!" The kids were gathered in the courtyard at the foot of the tower, their eyes scanning the green sky for the first glimpse of the Uncle's spaceship. Up in the tower at the radar console, I picked up a blip at about 300 kilomiles. I interrogated, and the target trace blinked in the proper code sequence. I turned on the Kiddicom system and announced that we had just received a message from the cold side of number 1 sun. The sound of cheering drifted up from the courtyard. "The Uncles will be here in 10 minutes, I said. "Mummy, will you lead us in a rehearsal of the welcome song, please?" I stood by the window, listening to the vast sound of 137 voices, each trying to outdo the other in amplitude and sincerity. "Welcome to Fairyland, welcome to Fairyland, welcome, dear Uncles, to Fairyland today." It was discordant, it was childish, it was even ludicrous, but I loved it. I loved it without quite understanding it, and it made me feel happy yet sad at the same time. I took the elevator down to the loading platform and drove the monorail car out to the spaceport, which was 10 miles from Fairyland, across the arid, lifeless desert. We'd built the dock close enough for easy access, yet far enough away so that the awesome sight of a spaceship landing or blasting off wouldn't generate too much curiosity in the kids. It was a link with the outside world, a world that had no reality for them, and for that reason could not stand too close an inspection. The Earth ship was snuggling comfortably into the dock as I climbed out of the car. I ran across the landing platform and pressed the control switch that lowered the gangway against the ship's hatch.
Boswell, the council chairman, was first down the gangway. He was short, fat without being flabby, and completely bald except for a fringe of white fuzz around the back of his head and over his ears. He had an oversized nose and bright blue eyes that twinkled perpetually. The kids called him Uncle Chub. "Well, well, well, Harry, you look fine, fine. Good to see you. How's it going?" "Fine, sir, just fine." His 3 colleagues followed close on his heels. I shook hands with each of them. 2 of them I'd known as long as I had Boswell, ever since I'd become the 3rd daddy of Fairyland. There was old Ika, lean and tall and solemn, with never much to say. The kids called him Uncle Thin. "Good to see you, Harry. How are you doing?" Then there was Hopkins, about my age, and therefore younger than either Boswell or Ika. A nice, medium guy, Hopkins, medium build, medium grey hair, medium voice, affable without being garrulous, intelligent without being stuffy. The kids called him Uncle Hoppy. "Hi, Dad, how's the gang?" The 4th councilman was a stranger. Boswell introduced him as William Pettigrew. He was slightly built, fidgety, shrill-voiced, and weasel-faced. His mouth was fixed in a perpetual smirk, and I formed a dislike for him, immediate and intense. I wondered what the kids would call him, and a suggestion immediately came to mind. Uncle Jerk. "Can't say as I approve of this place at all," said Pettigrew as we climbed aboard the monocar. "Matter of fact, I strongly disapprove." "Well, sir," I said, trying not to gnash my teeth, "I don't quite see how you can be certain until you've seen it." "Principle, matter of principle." I didn't answer. Hoppy called my eye and winked. A rousing cheer came from the kids down in the courtyard as we climbed out of the car. Then I heard the brief, plaintive whimper of Mummy's pitch pipe, and once again the welcome song reverberated throughout Fairyland. The uncles waved down at the kids, with the exception of Pettigrew, who fidgeted until the song was finished. As we descended in the lift, he said, "This place must cost the taxpayers a tidy sum." "As a matter of fact, we're almost self-sustaining," I said. "A few tons of reactive fuel per annum is all we require to—" "Don't humour him, Harry," said Boswell. "Let him read the report." Pettigrew glared, but except for an inaudible mutter, he took Boswell's squelch without comment. I was wondering what significance might be hidden in this addition of a 4th uncle to the council, but I finally shrugged it off. Earthside politics bored the hell out of me. Mummy was waiting to greet us as we stepped out of the elevator, and Uncle Chub gave her a big hug. "How's the First Lady of the Galaxy?" he said, and she brightened as though it were a spontaneous compliment she was hearing for the first time instead of the 20th. Then the kids broke ranks and milled around us, squealing and laughing and firing questions about Santa Claus. Being new, Pettigrew received a good deal of attention. "Who are you? What's your uncle name? Do you live with Santa Claus or with the fairies? How cold is the cold side of number 1 sun? Do you like merry-go-rounds better than roller coasters?" The pelting of this verbal barrage sent him spinning like a crippled spaceship, and I wedged myself through the ring of kids to rescue him. "Come on, gang, break it up." Pettigrew gave me a look of wide-eyed terror. "They're insane," he whispered. "Look at them. They're adults, but they act like children," I said. "That's what they are, Mr. Pettigrew. I thought the other councillors had explained." "They did, but I never thought. Well, I mean, this is awful." I grinned. "You'll get used to it." "Whole thing is ludicrous, ludicrous." He waved an all-encompassing hand that included the kids, Fairyland, its basic concept, and me. I was getting more disenchanted with this character all the time. "Now just a minute, you." A strong hand closed over my arm, and I looked around into the grinning face of Hoppy. "Let's get the program started, eh?" he said. The next 3 hours were a hodgepodge of well-rehearsed chaos. The council had to inspect everything so they could return a first-hand report to the Solar Committee for Sociological Research,
and on the other hand, all the kids had to show off for the uncles. The first stop on the agenda was the Arts and Crafts building, where we exhibited the drawings and clay animals and models and beadwork and 1,001 other items the kids had made with their own hands. From there we adjourned to the school, where Ruth had displayed a few samples of the work of each class. "We only have one teacher," I explained to Pettigrew, "because each class meets for just an hour a day. We stagger the classes, kindergarten through 3rd grade. The kids spend an average of 5 years in each grade, including kindergarten." "Ridiculous!" "There's nothing ridiculous about it," I said patiently, "for the simple reason that they're not in any hurry." Well, I am. Let's get on with it." From the school, the procession migrated to the recreation hall. We visited the game room for demonstrations of Checker Champ Mike 1 and Chess Champ Adam 2, then witnessed exhibitions at the bowling alley, basketball court, and the ice and roller rinks. I explained to Pettigrew that each kid was champ of something. There were enough categories for everybody, and nobody was allowed to be champ for more than one thing at a time. Uncle Petty mumbled something I didn't catch. We skirted the midway and took a tour of the pretty park. Here at last was something Pettigrew could accept. He almost smiled as he saw the huge flower beds raised by the botany team. But the almost smile disappeared as we explained to him the purpose of the little cottages nestled among the trees. His eyes bugged, and his face became quite red, and his voice failed him so that he could only sputter. "We only retard the mind," I explained, "not the body. Playing house is just another recreational activity, like riding the merry-go-round or playing golf. The kids enjoy it, but they don't make a big thing out of it. We treat the whole subject quite casually and frankly." I'll say this for Pettigrew. He had spunk. He swallowed his moral indignation, squared his thin shoulders, took a deep breath, and managed to find his voice. But it failed him again on the word pregnancy. "We allow that to occur only rarely," I said. "We're building to a static population of 140. At the current rate of $1 per year, in 3 more years we'll—" "1 what per year?" "Dolly." I caught Hoppy's muffled snort behind me and managed to hold down the size of my grin. "The kids call it making a dolly. It's a rare treat, and the girls look forward to it." When the danger of apoplexy had subsided, Mr. Pettigrew choked. This is monstrous! Monstrous!" And having found the right word, he savoured it. "Monstrous!" There were too many kids around to pursue the discussion. Little pitches, I thought. I was especially concerned about Adam too, who had been lurking as close to the group of uncles as possible, soaking in every word like a damp sponge. Twice I whispered to Ruth to decoy him out of earshot, but she was too busy to keep an eye on him all the time. She'd no sooner turn her back than he'd edge up through the crowd again, a look of fierce curiosity on his thin face. From the pretty park we made our way to the golf course, the football and baseball fields, then the tennis courts and swimming pool. Demonstrations were given at each stop, with much shouting and applause. After the final demonstration by the diving champ, we made a tour of the dormitories. Pettigrew went through a minor tantrum again when the dolly team showed him through the small maternity ward in the girls' dorm. At last we filed into the auditorium for the happy show. The kids who weren't champs of some game or craft were all in the happy show. We watched, listened, and applauded for the song champ, the somersault champ, the dancing champ, the yo-yo champ, and many more. The pièce de résistance was a playlet entitled The Uncle's Visit, where 3 of the boys imitated Uncles Chub, Hoppy, and Thin. We hadn't been expecting Uncle Petty, so he wasn't in it. Probably just was as well, I thought. It was a riot. After the show, lollipops were passed out to everybody, and it was free time until lunch. Mummy stayed below to keep an eye on things, and I herded the uncles up to the conference room in the tower. Uncle Chub Boswell rapped the meeting to order. He paid me the standard compliment about how healthy and happy the kids looked, and what a fine job Ruth and I were doing here, then asked me to read the annual report. Before I could get my papers in order, Pettigrew piped, "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a few pertinent questions." "All right, Petty, make it brief." "Thank you. I should like to ask, what was your name again?" "Barnaby," I said. "Harry Barnaby. Just call me Daddy." He glared my grin into oblivion. "Mr. Barnaby, I would like you to explain to me the purpose of this installation." For some reason, the tone of his voice on the word installation infuriated me. "What the devil are you driving at?" I snapped. There was a faint suggestion of a sneer on his pasty little face. "I'm interested in ascertaining, Mr. Barnaby, just how you justify the continued conduction of this perpetual circus and picnic for the mentally retarded at tremendous expense to the taxpayers." I felt an almost irresistible urge to lean across the conference table and hit him in the mouth. I turned to Boswell and said, "Chubb, I think you'd better get this pipsqueak out of here." Boswell glowered at Pettigrew. "Petty, I told you to watch your lip." "I don't have to take that kind of talk from you, Boswell." "Yes, you do, as long as I'm chairman of this committee." "Don't be surprised if we have a new chairman shortly after we return to Earth," said Mr. Pettigrew smugly. Boswell grinned at me. "Mr. Pettigrew figures he's got influence, Harry. He has a second cousin on the Senate Committee of the Galactic Council. Figures he'll have me sacked and make himself chairman. He ain't been a bureaucrat long enough to appreciate the red tape involved in that kind of caper." I laughed, and managed to look at Pettigrew without wanting to hit him. "I don't mind questions," I said, "as long as they're put to me in a civil manner. I'll tell you, Mr. Pettigrew, that the purpose of this installation is, we're trying to find out how to make people happy, and we think we've got the answer. Don't let them find out that there's no Santa Claus, that everybody dies, and that it doesn't always pay to be good. Don't let them know that sex is dirty, childbirth is painful, and not everybody can be a champion. Don't let them find out what a stupid, sordid, ugly, ridiculous place the world is. In short, Mr. Pettigrew, don't let them grow up." "Nonsense." "Nonsense, Mr. Pettigrew? You saw them. You saw how they live. You saw their faces and heard them laugh. Judge for yourself." Pettigrew scowled at me. "Am I to understand, Mr. Barnaby, that you seriously propose that this quaint little, experiment be adopted as a way of life for everybody?" "Why not?" I was warming to my subject now, and I leaned across the table toward him. "Why not? We've had 7,000 years of civilization. We've spent the first 6,000 learning more and more subtle and complex reasons for hating one another, and the last 1,000 in developing more elaborate and fiendish ways of destroying one another. And out of our so-called scientific advancement, accidentally, has come a thing called automation. The age of the labourer and breadwinner is past. What are we going to do, Mr. Pettigrew? Let man use his leisure time to discover even more effective ways of destroying himself? Or let him live in a fairyland?" Uncle Petty turned his head slowly, letting his gaze travel around the room as if he were seeking moral support. He started to say something, then shook his head. "Think of it," I went on, "a whole world full of happy kids, and a new kind of aristocracy, the daddies and mummies. They and their children will be trained to supervise, to keep an eye on things, just as Ruth and I do here. The kids could be trained to do what little maintenance the machines require." "You're insane!" Pettigrew exploded. "That's it! You're crazier than the rest of them out there! I don't know whether or not I really intended to hit him, or how things might have turned out if I had. Luckily, Boswell jumped to his feet and pulled me back as I made a lunge across the table. "Take it easy, Harry," he said quietly. Then he turned to Pettigrew. "Petty, we've had enough out of you for today.
Open your mouth again, and I'll lock you in the ship till we're ready to leave. Pettigrew slid lower in his chair, and after a brief mumbling was silent. I apologized to Boswell for losing my temper. "Forget it, Harry," he chuckled. "Wanted to hit him myself lots of times. Well, let's have the report, eh?" The bulk of the annual report consisted of a lot of dry statistics about the hydroponics crop, the weight and height of emotional ratings of the kids, reports on certain educational and recreational experiments, and so on. The problem of Adam 2 was the last item on the agenda, and as I read it, they perked up their ears and stopped yawning. And in light of these developments, the undersigned recommends that Adam 2 be transported to Earth and given a normal education so that he may be assimilated into the society. I stood for a moment, holding the papers in my hand, looking from one to the other for that quartet of blank, silent faces. Finally Boswell cleared his throat. "Harry, let me get this straight. You think that this, what's his name, Adam 2, you actually think he's, growing up?" I nodded. There isn't a doubt in my mind, and Ruth agrees. "And you think we ought to take him back to Earth with us?" "Sure, I do. I think that's the only solution, don't you?" Ika coughed discreetly. "I'm afraid it isn't any solution at all." "What would we do with him?" Hoppy wanted to know. "Look," I said, "the kid is a misfit. He doesn't belong here. He belongs on Earth where he can get an education and maybe a chance to make something of himself." Boswell cleared his throat again. "Seems like he'd be a worse misfit on Earth than he is here, Harry." "He would not," I snapped. "He's a sharp kid. He'd adapt himself in no time." Ika spoke up again. "It seems to me we're overlooking an important point here, gentlemen. Isn't Fairyland supposed to be a sort of testing ground for a particular sociological theory? It seems to me we'd be defeating our purpose if we remove this lad just because it doesn't seem to fit. If the world is to be converted to a Fairyland, there'll be more Adam 2s from time to time. What's to be done with them?" "Nuts," I said. "It's not the same problem, and you know it. If the whole world were like this place, Fairyland would be the only reality there was. Guys like Adam would have to accept it. Why don't you just admit that you don't want to be bothered with this?" Boswell rapped for order. "Gentlemen, there's no need to waste any more time with this. Now, Harry, you know we've got no real jurisdiction in this. We're just advisory. The kids are all wards of the solar state, and if you want to appeal for help through official channels, we'll be glad to initiate a request for you when we get back to Earth." I realized now that I might as well have saved my breath. It was the old bureaucratic buck pass. For 20 years, the uncles' visit had been merely an annual ritual, and they intended to keep it that way. They had a nice, soft touch, and they weren't going to let anything spoil it. Sure, they'd initiate a report, and by the time it filtered through the spiral nebula of red tape, Adam and I would both have died of old age. I gathered up my papers. "Just forget it," I said sourly. "If there's no further business, let's adjourn for lunch, and I'll take you back to the ship." At the spaceport, we shook hands, and Hoppy hung back after the others had gone up the gangway. He put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry about this Adam thing, Harry." "Forget it. I know how you feel, and I wish we could help, but you know how it is." "Sure, I know how it is." "The administration's all wound up in the rearmament program, doubling the size of the space fleet. Everybody's edgy, wondering whether there's going to be war with the Centauri crowd. Hardly anyone remembers there is such a place as Fairyland. If we go back and kick up a fuss, no telling what might happen. Most of the government budget is earmarked for defence. We might all find ourselves among the unemployed." I looked at him for a long time, until his eyes couldn't meet mine any more. "Hoppy," I said quietly, "how long has it been since they stopped thinking of Fairyland as a practical possibility?" He shrugged, still not looking at me. "I don't know, Harry. 12, maybe 15 years, I suppose. There aren't many happy hooligans around anymore. At least they aren't working at it. They're all getting rich off the defense effort. So they're just letting us drift along out here because it's easier than disbanding the thing and trying to rehabilitate the kids. That right? He nodded. That's about it. I took a deep breath and shook my head. Why, Hoppy? Why? Oh, hell, he blurted. Let's face it, Harry. The whole idea just isn't practical. It would never work. Never work? I shouted. It's been working for 40 years. Sure, it works here. On an isolated desert planet 1 billion miles from Earth, it works fine. But you can't remake the whole world into a fairyland, Harry. You just can't do it. There was a sinking, sickening feeling in my guts. Okay, Hoppy, okay. Blast off. He stood looking at me for a moment, then turned and hurried up the gangway. Just as he reached the hatch, 2 figures emerged suddenly from the ship. One wore the uniform of a Space Fleet astronavigator. The other was Adam too. I ran up the gangway in time to hear the navigator telling Hoppy, "I found him in the forward chart room." "Adam!" I yelled. "What are you up to now?" "I wanted to go along," he said. "I wanted to see if they're really going to the cold side of number 1 sun." I grabbed his arm and hustled him down to the monocar. We slid clear of the dock, and about half a mile away I stopped the car to watch them blast off. Adam's eyes were wide with wonderment. "What makes it go?" "Rocket motors," I said absently. I watched the ship, now just a mote disappearing in the twilight sky. And I thought, there goes the tag end of a 20-year dream. That was all it had ever been. I knew that now. Just a dream, and a stupid one at that. I deluded myself even more than the kids. "What's a rocket motor?" I looked at Adam. "What? What did you say?" I said, "What's a rocket motor?" "Who said anything about rocket motors?" "You did. I asked you what makes it go, and you said rocket motors." I frowned. "Forget it. Magic makes it go. Santa Claus magic." "Okay, Daddy, sure." Something about his tone made me look sharply at him. He was grinning at me, a cynical, adult-type grin. Yesterday it would have made me furious. Today, for some crazy reason, it made me burst out laughing. I laughed for quite a long time, and then as suddenly as it began, it was over. I rumpled his hair and started the car. "Adam," I said, "take a tip from your daddy. Stop trying to find out about things. Hang on to your dreams. Dreams are happy things, and truth is sometimes pretty ugly." Chapter 4. That night after taps, I told Ruth about the council meeting and about my chat with Hoppy at the ship. She came and sat beside me and, in the age-old manner of a loyal wife, assured me that everything was going to be all right. I stood up and began prowling around the room. It's not all right. The plain and simple truth is that we've thrown away 20 years on this pipe dream. All for nothing. "You don't mean that, Harry? Not for nothing?" "The hell I don't. Remember how sceptical we were when we first heard about this place. Then old Hogarth, Daddy too, came to see us. Remember how we fell for it. We were going to be doing something important. We were the vanguard of a world revolution, the greatest thing since the invention of people, a great sociological advancement. What a laugh! Fairyland is nothing but an orphan home. And mark my words, sooner or later they're going to come and close the place down." Ruth patted the seat beside her. "Harry, come back and sit down." I scowled at her, but I sat. "Harry," she said, "I'm just a woman. I don't know much about world revolutions or sociology, but I know one thing. No matter what happens, these 20 years haven't been wasted. We've been happy, Harry, and so have the kids." "I wonder," Are they happy, Ruth? Do we even know what happiness is? She smiled. Darling, please don't go abstract on me. I know they're happy. And what about Adam? She shook her head. I suppose he's not, but the percentage is still pretty high, don't you think? You said Fairyland is nothing more than an orphan home, and maybe you're right. I guess I've never really thought of it any other way. I stared at the woman who had been my wife for 23 years as if I'd never seen her before. You mean you never, not even at the beginning, believed in the idea of Fairyland? I just didn't think much about it, Harry. I believed in the kids, that's all. I figured that our job was to look after them and keep them happy and well. We've done that job, and I think it's a pretty fine achievement. I'm proud, for both of us. Thanks, I said dully. You know, Mummy, I'd almost forgotten. Almost forgotten what, Daddy? I laughed shortly. What it feels like to find out there's no Santa Claus. In the 2-week interval between Uncle's Day and Christmas too, the air in Fairyland became supercharged with a kind of hushed expectancy, and of course everybody was being extra special good in the manner of kids everywhere during Santa's season. The holiday spirit should have been contagious, but this season I wasn't having any. My pet theory and private dream had been scuttled, so I sulked around feeling sorry for myself. Even Adam too was a model of juvenile deportment. Never late for meals, always washed behind his ears, and best of all, he stopped asking embarrassing questions. This sudden change probably would have made me suspicious if I'd been thinking clearly. As it was, I merely felt grateful. And of course Mummy was too busy helping the girls make popcorn and candy to concern herself with such things. On Christmas Eve, I turned the weather machines to snow, a category specially reserved for our 2 Christmases, and the big, soft, white flakes came drifting lazily down into Fairyland. The lights were out in all the buildings, the kids were asleep, and our 2 moons were bright and full. Ruth and I stood silently on the front porch, watching the snow and the moonlight. Harry? Do you still think these 20 years were wasted? I slipped an arm around her waist. It isn't fair to ask me that on a night like this. But if they were, I'm glad we wasted them together. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. Thank you, Daddy. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Mummy. The next morning, I donned my pillow-stuffed Santa uniform and itchy white whiskers, and stood with Mummy on the auditorium stage, beaming into a bright sea of expectant faces. Merry Christmas, everybody! Merry Christmas! Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas, Santa Claus! Came the answering chorus. Did you all manage to bust up your toys from last Christmas? Yes! Good! I boomed. Ho, ho, ho! Can't get new ones unless we bust up the old ones, you know. We all sang Christmas in Fairyland, and then it was present passing time. Santa's space sled was behind me, chock full of toys. I reached back and pulled out a package. Julia 3! Here I am, Santy! She came running down the aisle, a lovely blonde of about 25, curls flying. Have you been a good girl, Julia 3? Yes, Santy. And you wanted a new dolly? She nodded emphatically. You broke your dolly from last Christmas? Yes, Santy. Fine. She took her present and went skipping off to the far side of the stage. Everything went smoothly for perhaps half an hour, and the sled was about half empty when I snagged a small flat package marked Adam 2. He strolled down the aisle and up onto the stage. His eyes were bright, a little too bright, and there was just the hint of a smile on his thin face. Well, well, Adam 2, have you been a good boy? Not very. I gave him a fierce Santa Claus frown. Well, now, that's too bad, but old Santa's glad that you're honest about it. By the way, you didn't send old Santy a letter, did you?" "No, I didn't think I'd get a present because I wasn't good. Anyway, I didn't know what I wanted." He was staring fixedly at my beard. "Well, suppose we give you a present anyway, and you try very hard to be good between now and next Christmas, eh? Ho, 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 ho." We'd gotten him a set of chessmen. He took the package without looking at it. "Where's Daddy?" he asked suddenly. It was so unexpected, so matter-of-fact, that it caught me off balance. The kids were always too excited on Christmas morning to worry about where Daddy might be. "Well, sir, ho, 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 Daddy was kind of sleepy this morning, so he thought he'd rest up a bit and let Mummy and Santa Claus look after things. Merry Christmas, Adam, too. Now, let's see who's next." I turned to pull another package from the sled, and Adam took one quick step forward, grabbed my beard, and yanked hard. It came away in his hands, and there I stood with my naked daddy face exposed to all the kids. The silence was immediate and deadly. Then I heard Adam's sudden, sharp intake of breath. That was almost like a sob. I glanced at him for just an instant, but in that instant I glimpsed the terrible disappointment he must have felt. It was all there, in his eyes and in his face. He hadn't wanted that beard to come off. He'd wanted Santa Claus to be real. He turned away from me and faced the kids, holding that phony beard high over his head. "You see," he shrilled, "it's just like I said. There really isn't any Santa Claus. He's just make-believe like the fairies and—" His voice broke, and he threw the beard down, jumped off the stage, and ran toward the exit. Ruth called to him, "Adam, come back here at once." "Let him go, Mummy." I looked ruefully out at our stunned and silent audience. "We've got something more important to do first." I stepped forward and pulled off my Santa Claus hat. For a long moment I just stood there, trying to decide what to say. Even if I'd had my speech rehearsed, I don't think I could have talked around the lump in my throat. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I had failed them. It was a feeling that went much deeper than my inability to cope with Adam 2 and his problem. It was a real, deep-down hollow feeling that stemmed from my conviction, ever since the uncle's visit, that the whole idea of Fairyland was a mistake. I wanted to talk to each and every one of them, alone. I wanted to tell them, "It's going to be all right. Mummy and Daddy love you and will always look after you, so you mustn't worry." So I stood there on the stage in my ridiculous padded Santa suit, and somehow managed to smile. "Kids," I said, "Daddy's sure sorry, but you see Santa Claus just couldn't make it today. His spaceship broke down, like a merry-go-round, remember? So Santa asked Daddy to pretend." Down in the front row, 9-year-old Molly 5 suddenly began to sob. 2 rows behind her, 13-year-old Mary 3 took up the cry. Then across the aisle from Mary, another girl wailed, "I want Santa Claus!" In the back of the auditorium, 15-year-old Johnny 4 shouted, "We hate you! You're a mean old daddy!" And there in the aisle, pointing an accusing finger at me, was 38-year-old Mike 1, who brought his Santa problem to me. Was it only 3 weeks ago? Mike 1, his arm extended, his chin trembling, yelling, "You lied to me! You lied! Lied! Lied!" It took the better part of an hour to restore a semblance of order. When the first shock was over, and the hysterical, contagious tears had subsided a little, Mummy and I managed to convince the kids, at least most of them, that Santa was alive and well, that he was very sorry he couldn't make it, but if they'd be good and not fuss about it, They'd all get something extra special next Christmas. Just for good measure, we doubled the ice cream ration for the next 2 weeks. When it was over, I went looking for Adam too. I was boiling mad, and I knew I ought to wait until I cooled off before having it out with him. But after what he'd pulled today, I didn't dare trust him out of my sight that long. I knew that my anger was irrational, but the knowledge didn't help much. I found him behind the picnic grounds, throwing snowballs at the great wall. He was using the force field like a billiard cushion to bank his shots back in toward the trees. He saw me coming and waited quietly, idly tossing a snowball from one hand to the other. For a moment I thought he might be going to heave it at me, but then he looked down at it, as if it were something he'd outgrown, and tossed it indifferently aside. The expression on his face was not one of defiance or arrogance, but neither was it that of a boy who was sorry he'd been naughty. I guess it was sort of a waiting look. "Well, son," I said, surprised that my anger had suddenly evaporated, "you sure messed things up, didn't you?" "I guess I did all right." "You're not sorry?" "I had to find out." I nodded. "And you figure you did find out, is that it?" "Yes." "You wouldn't believe me if I told you that Santa just couldn't get here, that he asked me to pretend to be him so the kids wouldn't be disappointed." He shook his head. "No, I wouldn't believe it." For a moment the anger boiled up in me again, and I wanted to grab him and shake him. I had a crazy notion that if I shook him hard enough I could shake him back into the mould and make him once again just a kid in Fairyland. Then everything would be all right. I bent over and made a snowball and heaved it at the wall, to give my hands something to do. My throw was too straight, and the force field kicked it back at us. We both ducked as it whizzed over our heads, then grinned at each other. "Come on over to Mummy's and Daddy's house," I said. "I want to talk to you." We trudged along through the 3-inch snow, down the path between the circus grounds and the dormitories. The kids were drifting back from lunch. I noticed the noise level was considerably lower than on any other Christmas I could remember. They hadn't completely recovered yet, and they probably wouldn't for a long time. I didn't know what to do about it, except to sweat it out. Ruth greeted us at the door. "Hello, Adam," she said. "Come on in." "You're not angry with me?" She shook her head. "We know you couldn't help yourself, don't we, Daddy?" "I guess so," I said dryly. We went into the living room, and I waved Adam to his seat. I stretched out in my favourite chair lounge, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. Adam sat forward in his chair, watching me with that waiting look, defiant yet shy, courageous yet a little afraid, resigned and yet hopeful. "Adam," I said at last, "what are you trying to prove? What is it you want?" He wet his lips and lowered his eyes for a moment. Then his gaze met mine without flinching. "It's like I told you once before," he said quietly. "I just want to know the truth, the real truth about everything." I got to my feet and began to slowly pace the floor. I paused in front of Ruth's chair and looked down at her. She caught my hand, gave it a squeeze, and nodded. I turned back to Adam. "You won't like it," I said. "Maybe not, but I gotta know. Just gotta." "Not gotta," Ruth corrected automatically. "Have to." "I have to know." I paced 3 more laps, still hesitating. I felt like a surgeon, trying to decide whether or not to operate when it's a toss-up whether the operation will kill the patient or cure him. "All right, Adam," I said wearily. "You win. But you have to promise me something. Promise me that you'll never say anything to the other kids about what I'm going to tell you." Now it was his turn to weigh a decision, and I could feel the battle going on behind those crystal-clear eyes. His innate honesty battling with his insatiable curiosity. He considered for perhaps a full minute, then he nodded. "Okay, I don't think it's right not to tell kids the truth, but I promise. Cross your heart, cross my heart." I took a deep breath, signalled Ruth to make some coffee, and began. "You were right about Santa Claus, Adam. He's just make-believe, and so are the fairies. Santa Claus was invented by mummies and daddies to represent the spirit of Christmas for kids too little to understand its real meaning. People on Earth still observe the holiday, although they've gradually forgotten what it really stands for. I'll explain that part to you later. What's Earth, Daddy? Earth is where everybody lived before there were any spaceships. It's a big place, and some of it's nice, and some of it not so nice. The people live in houses, something like this one, and the ones in a house are called families. There's a mummy and a daddy for each family, and their kids live in the house with them. Where do the kids come from? From the mummy. It's the same as what we call making a dolly. Oh. I talked for 6 hours, until I was so hoarse my voice was cracking on every other word. He took it all in stride, injecting a question here and there, absorbing it all like an unemotional sponge. But when I began to talk about war, he became a little upset. I explained how it had begun as individual struggles for survival or supremacy in the days of the cavemen, how it had evolved along with society into struggles between families and tribes, then nations, and now, between planets. But why do they kill each other, Daddy? That doesn't prove anything. I laughed. Son, if I could answer that one, I'd be Daddy number 1 of the whole universe. We finally packed Adam off to bed in the spare room, after promising him we'd talk some more the next night. I'd shown him my library, and told him he could come and read any time he liked, though of course he mustn't take any books out of the house where the kids might see them. Ruth and I stood on the front porch for a while in the moonlight, gazing out over our once peaceful little world. "Harry, what will become of him?" "I don't know. He'll have to decide for himself. He became a man tonight, you know. I'd like him to stay, but I imagine he'll want to go to Earth. He's got a mind that just won't stop. The best thing we can do is try to teach him the things he'll need to survive in that cockeyed world, and turn him loose. It's no good trying to hang on to your kids once they're grown up, Mummy." She shivered a little and moved closer to me. "I suppose you're right. I think I know now why mothers hate to see their children grow up." I put my arm around her and gave her an affectionate squeeze. "He'll be all right. You know, in a way, I'm almost glad this happened. Maybe, just maybe, Adam has given us the answer. Maybe the thing to do is not to keep them kids all their lives, but to let them grow up more slowly, in their own time, instead of to some prescribed formula. The world has kept getting more complicated all the time, and a kid just can't grow up in it as easily as before." When we were in bed, just before I put out the light, I said, "I guess I can answer your question now, Mummy. I don't still think these 20 years were wasted. If I had to do it over again, I'd still want to be Daddy of Fairyland." Chapter 5. The next morning at breakfast time, I went upstairs and knocked on the door of Adams's room. He called to me to come in, and I opened the door, then stopped, 1 foot over the threshold. Across the room, admiring his bewhiskered face in the mirror, was Santa Claus. "Ho, ho, ho!" he boomed in a perfect imitation of my own Santa voice. "Merry Christmas, Daddy!" He tugged at the beard, and there was the grinning face of Adam too. "I found it in the closet," he said. "Do I look the part?" I laughed. For a minute I thought you were the real thing. He looked away. I guess you know I'll want to go to Earth to live." I nodded. "It will be pretty rough at first. You realize that?" "Yes, I expect it will. Daddy, I'm sorry I messed up Christmas for the kids yesterday. I'd kind of like to make up for it by playing Santa for them today. Will you stand by me in case some smarty-pants tries to snatch my beard off?" I grinned at him, but I didn't say anything because I discovered there was a strange kind of lump in my throat. "I was thinking too," he went on, "that maybe I could come back with a supply ship each Christmas and do the same thing if you'd like me to." I cleared my throat. That would be fine, Adam." He hesitated again, then blurted, "It isn't right, you know. Fairyland, I mean. It isn't fair to kids not to let them grow up, and it isn't the answer to all the things you told me are wrong about the world. I know, Adam, I know. Sooner or later they'll realize that, on Earth." "I think they already have," I said. He scratched his chin under the beard. "Then some day they might decide to close Fairyland, mightn't they? So I was thinking, maybe each Christmas time you and Mummy could choose 2 or 3 of the older kids and sort of get them ready for the world, the way you did me. Then I could take them back to Earth with me and help them get started. You could tell the other kids they went to live with Santa Claus." I stared at him in amazement. This kid. I couldn't think of him any other way. Yesterday had been little more than a juvenile delinquent. Today he was a mature, thinking adult who in a few sparse words had provided the answer to the question that had been gnawing at me for 2 weeks. What was to become of Fairyland? I felt the way a father must feel when he suddenly realizes his boy has grown up and has turned out all right. Kind of proud, and more than a little grateful. I gripped Adams's hand. "Son, you've got yourself a deal. Come along and let's surprise the kids." I went down the stairs arm in arm, and I called to Ruth. "Hey, Mummy, guess what? There really is a Santa Claus after all."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you like this sort of human-read narration, please consider becoming a member of the channel. Members not only get rid of some of their unwanted money, but also may access the stories a whole week before everyone else. And that's it, really. Oh yes, the stories are and will remain AI-free. And free of charge, of course.